We can go ahead and get the meeting underway. It seems like it's been a long time since we've seen each other. I always regret that. We've got a lot of work ahead of us, and there's been a lot of work that, yes, we should have been doing all along as well, since we last met. But today we're going to discuss some of the changes of chapters 5 and 6. If you've had an opportunity to review those, comments are due the 25th. Please get those into John so they can do their work. I have not submitted mine. There's a lot of information, and in chapter 5 there are a lot of numbers. But please continue to work on those. Today we're going to be introducing the draft of chapter 7. We'll finish the development.
Sure will.
Plan recommendations and begin discussion on the implementation plan. And I know, in case y'all aren't aware, tomorrow, if I'm not mistaken, the Broad is having a meeting and they are going over their parts of their implementation plan as it is being implemented. I'm going to try to make it to that meeting. I can't promise, to see how their work is progressing and the work they've done. Because as you know, that's as hard as this work is, you know, it's going to be continuing the progress that we start here that will really make a difference in what we do. So with that, we have an agenda before us. I would accept the motion that we approve said agenda.
Second.
Second, all those in favor, please raise your right hand or say aye. You will have all have received the October 30th minutes and summary. I hope you've had the opportunity to review those, and I would accept motion to approve both the minutes and the summary.
Make a motion.
Second, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Keep going back and forth on you. SC Waters update. So should I ask folks? I can tell you what I'm familiar with the update. If you are familiar, there's a SC, Waters SC, is it .com?
Yeah.
To get to the work that they are progressing, I think the biggest thing that I saw on the website is their communication plan and how they plan to hold meetings, bring in stakeholders. I would recommend we can send out a link to that. Everybody review that. It certainly mentions the work of the RBCs, but I think there's I'm not sure, and Joe, if you've got anything that you can share with this, what the official communication will be with the RBCs.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's just a lot of opportunities to plug in. There's if you go to the website, there's an opportunity to provide comment there. There's sector forums ongoing for the various sectors involved, and they're trying to grow that input out into the community. And I think the RBCs will be focused at some point through that process, kind of organically, is the way I understand it's happening.
So I would, and Catherine's running a few minutes late. So before we really go down this conversation too far, I prefer her to be here with it. She and I have talked about how to, as a RBC, how to interact with the organization, but I also believe there is absolutely a place for all of us as individuals to act in the process. There are certainly things that as stakeholders representing the various folks that you represent, there's a role for you here, of course, and what you bring to the table here is greatly appreciated. But there's also an opportunity, I think, for all of us to individually interact with the Waters SC group and to be involved in their meetings. And I would encourage, if you. We are all very, very interested in water resources in the state, or we wouldn't have been here for the last 18 months and projected for 2-3 more years for some of us. And so, you know, we appreciate your dedication to this effort. You know, early on with the legislative group, there was concern of what this effort's going to mean. And then with the Waters SC group, what's this effort going to mean? But I think we are fundamentally tasked with a task, and I think that will progress as stated. I think that there will be some high-level guidance from the Water SC and as they finish their work. So I think we should keep that in mind as we develop recommendations, mitigation, or implementation plans on how we are going to incorporate what they bring to the table and what they pass. But I think it does not diminish the work we have ahead of us. If anything, it to me enhances it and makes it all the more meaningful. Instead of putting you on the spot, you walk
I took the scenic route, y'all. I don't even know what happened. It's fine.
We were just talking about the Water SC's group. I said I'd wanted you to be here for the heavy part of any discussion we have. So I would ask that we you and I chat about that, and we do that towards the end of the meeting if we're going to discuss anything more, just so we're not catching Catherine off.
I'm ready if you want to do it now.
Well, the floor is yours.
Yeah, okay, cool. Well, Casey and I had a wonderful chat about just the next steps with Water SC, and I've offered to draft up just a letter, a statement, one pager, not long, just from the Saluda RVC saying, you know, we are following this process, we're paying attention, we would love to be a part of the conversation and want to be moved into the meetings next year that occur at whatever appropriate interval it may be. You know, coming at it from a very positive stance, but just making folks who may not fully appreciate or be aware of us paying attention to the process. And so kind of wanted to, one, just gauge if you all approve of that path forward for us doing that. I was gonna draft it, Casey's gonna review it. You feel comfortable with us doing that and articulating that on behalf of the Saluda, or if you feel like you would want to read a letter before giving it a thumbs up. I don't think we're in a crazy hurry. I'd like to get that letter completed though, and we can thumbs up it in our December meeting if that works for everybody, but wanted to introduce the topic today.
And just to piggyback on that, we have a standing desire to write a letter to the legislative group. That group has still not officially been assigned or appointed, or however it's going to be. So we still have that charge ahead of us to do that. I would see this letter being something very similar. You know, in that we were just going to express, again, like Catherine said, who we are, what we're doing, the work we've done, what's ahead of us, and that we're here to be of assistance in any way we can. Again, we haven't been able to send that letter because we don't know who to send it to yet. Yes, sir.
So 2 questions. One, are the Water SC meetings online, publicly available online, or do you have to attend in person? Do we know? And 2, they are meeting monthly, so I would suggest we move sooner rather than later in submitting a letter. They have a meeting Friday and they have another one December 12th. I would suggest our letter get there at least in time for the December 12th.
So my understanding is Most of them will be online. I know there's going to be, or publicly.
Yeah, all of them will be live streamed on SEE TV. So you can watch it live as it occurs.
Live stream, but not like you couldn't
There's not
participate.
virtual participation. There's not a Zoom or a team component.
You can.
But there is public, I mean, there's the ability for public to be present as well.
Yeah.
There's a gallery in the room. You can, you mentioned comments
Yeah,
online.
you can post comments through the portal.
Oh, okay,
Yeah.
okay. So you can provide comments through the SCE TV portal as well. And again, they scheduled many listening meetings around the state through the months of January and February and March. So not details on locations that they've kind of put out a tentative schedule for those, and so there's going to be opportunities to learn and listen and provide comment.
Go ahead. What's their deadline?
So correct me when I get this wrong, by the end of January, they're supposed to have a report to the legislative group that was formed or will be formed by January or 1st of January. At that point, the legislative group is supposed to finish their work by March 31st.
I believe that's right. Yes.
Of
And-
2025?
Of 25. Water SC is supposed to finish their work and make their recommendations or outline the state water plan by December 31st of 25. So that they will be building on a lot of work that the other RBCs and that we will be preparing. They have access to everything we've done before, just like anybody else in the world does. So I think our voice will certainly be heard by that. I think, again, we may need to discuss do we have a desire as an RBC to try to have an RBC member involved in most of these, or do we do it as individuals and report back to the RBC as things come up? I see value in both. Coordinating 26 people on who can attend what would be challenging. But we've been working with challenges since we showed up, so that's certainly doable. Even if it's just an email to the group, I plan to be there, or I'm going to be listening, just so we can again know that at least our ears are part of the process, and if there's a concern or recommendations that should be a RBC level recommendation, that we can bring it back to the group and have that discussion.
Tell me again, Casey, what's our purpose for sending this letter and what we expect it to accomplish?
That is. So what we expect it to accomplish is there are folks on, from what I can tell, by looking at who's involved, there are folks on the Water SC that have not historically been involved in this process, at least from my vantage point. There are some agencies that I don't think have been represented on the PPAC or the RBCs. So it's one, to make them aware that we are an active group that is participating and that we have a voice and would like for it to be heard. I see that being the most likely thing that would come out of it. Other than that, certainly the folks from DES, a lot of folks are aware of the RBCs, but I think they've all been introduced to the concept. But just sending a list of who is on our RBC to these folks may be enlightening to some of them. Okay? So I would certainly think that would be a good thing to include in any letter, is this is who we are.
I would I would definitely support a letter. And some of us in this room met with DES on Monday, with Glenn Ellenberg. She had solicited our input through the Rivers Forever group on the water SC. And I kind of spoke up, expressing our, I guess, inquisition from our RBC that, you know, as to how this process overlaps with us and that they might want to consider some representation from our leadership as they go forward. So they're fully aware of what is. And then I did ask the question, well, you know, how is this schedule? Is this going to, you know, alienate those that are just getting started and that are not going to have time to get their recommendations in front of them before their recommendations are here? Because didn't really have a good answer to that other than, you know, it's the governor's directive and it needs to be an organic fluid process. So as soon as we get recommendations, you know, we're welcome to feed them to them and we're welcome to sit in on those meetings or listen to the meetings and we can enter comments in the chat. They're not taking oral comments at the meetings. But I just did express, you know, a desire to please don't forget us RVCs out here that have been working very hard. You know, some of us for coming on 2 years, and I think the new ones are gonna have to accelerate now, right? To compress their schedule to 1 year. So it's all very interesting.
There's a question for Rick on, what was the link to the SCETV portal?
It can be found on the Water SC site.
It's watersc.com.
watersc@def.sc.gov, I believe.
There you go.
I'll just
Come on, that should be rolling off your tongue by now.
I mean, you put Water SC in there, it'll.
Okay.
Yeah, it'll get there.
Jason, good answer to what you're trying to do with the letter. I appreciate that. And your other discussion, you was asking about other ideas, was throwing out about what kind of representation, if any, we would like to have. I personally think it would be a good idea for this River Basin Council to have somebody there officially representing us. I understand that we as individuals can do as we please and go and all that, but I want to caution people that if they're going as individuals, they identify themselves as individuals, not
Absolutely.
representing
Absolutely.
RBC when they're expressing their own personal opinion.
Yep, I agree.
Yes.
All right, any other discussion?
I will mention, at this Friday's meeting, I'm going to provide a presentation of Water SC that summarizes the state of surface water resources. So what we learned from the modeling in all the river basins that we've modeled so far, which is 6 of them.
Very good.
So that's kind of an informational topic. We've talked about at the December 12th meeting, consolidating and providing a summary of primarily the policy, legislative, and regulatory recommendations that each one of the RBCs have developed. So that's why we really want to get through those today, so we can provide yours along with upper savannas, broads, estos, PDs, and we're even going to start on that one lower savannah before the December 12th meeting, so we can try to get some layers into. So the point is to provide those recommendations developed by roughly 200 stakeholders that make up those 6 RBCs to Water SC while they think about what their report is going to be to the Surface Water Study Committee at the end of January. And hopefully they rely significantly on feedback from the RBCs and your recommendations. There are some common themes developing, so those common themes get advanced, and that's progress.
Correct, I agree. So do I need to, for us to draft a letter, or draft and send a letter to, Water SC group? I guess I would entertain a motion, that we do that or not.
Well, I'd like to see a draft of it before it went out.
Certainly.
But yeah, I put a motion in that the RBC approves the letter to go ahead and send it.
Second that.
So the motion is for us to draft a letter and submit it to the RBC for their review.
I'll throw out an alternative idea.
Okay.
We need us to approve it. To me, one thought when we were talking through this was to send it to the RBC through 2-3 days before you submit it and give people a chance to give feedback. Not necessarily a requirement that we, say vote on it, but one thought was that, that you're empowered to do it, but you do give us 2 to 3 days to get feedback.
Casey, is the letter meant to try to get us officially in the group? Because
That's
so I don't understand the need for the letter, since they've already said that the public can attend, the technical experts can attend. I mean, I know for one thing, Greenville Water is going to attend it as Greenville Water.
Sure.
But I don't understand the need to send a letter saying that the RBC wants to be part of it. We're already part of it.
Again, I think it's as much to show who the RBC is, who's it made up of, and to reemphasize the work we've done, especially to the folks that don't know the process. There are, from what I can tell from the list of stakeholders,
We're water utilities are well represented.
absolutely. And I expect water utilities to know what the RBCs are.
I think there's 5 or so RBC members or alternates, 2 from the Edisto, 2 from Upper Saluda, Savannah, 1 from Broad. That's about it.
Yeah.
There was no recreation unless you call tourism, as I recall, recreation.
There was a lot of academia and recreation, and at that first meeting, they tended to run the meeting long. So they did speak up.
What groups?
It was the group, the very last group, and the group. It might have been tourism, but they were talking about recreation, water, and things like that.
In the listing, what I had seen was it was mostly tourism and mostly golf courses.
So,
Jeff.
go
So
ahead.
to Jeff's comment, the reason I would support sending a letter is it reinforces the RBC program. And yes, while we can participate in the meetings, a letter to watersc.gov says we are an organization that is looking at water resource and water utilization, water availability, and also says we also would appreciate if you have any questions or outreach of us that you contact us. So it opens a two-way dialogue perhaps between Water SC and the RBC. So one, I think it is supporting what we are doing in front of in front of Water SC, and also has an opportunity to open a dialogue should there be a need for dialogue.
Well, and there's still some ambiguity on my part. So if you look at the framework, there was ongoing efforts after we finished our work in developing the plan for the PPAC to take that and do the work for coming up with the state water plan. They also have guidance and oversight of the RBCs. With the original PPAC, I can see where that would be a task they could handle. I'm not sure that is a task that this larger group of 25, if it's still a task on them. I haven't gotten a feel for that. I don't know if they are looking at the Water SC group of coming up with the state water plan, and on January 1st, 2026, their work is done. I'm assuming it would not be, but we know our work is not done. You know, our work continues. So if they say our job is to come up with the next state water plan, and we're done, the RBC's work and what we come up with our plan and how we're going to implement it continues. So I'm curious to see how that other pans out. But if it is we have a task, we're gonna get the task done. Our work hasn't stopped, so, and I don't know if they're aware of that. I don't know if that is the correct assumption on our part. Nobody has told me otherwise. So I'm assuming that we are going to develop a plan and an implementation schedule, and then we are going to work to implement said schedule. Now, there may be things that the Water SC group does that takes that implementation off of our plate. They may, especially with some of the regulatory, they may do that. That doesn't mean that there's other stuff we won't be trying to implement. So I think it's as much to say we're a group that has been working and will continue to work for water resource planning in the Saluda Basin. We support what they're doing. We're cautiously optimistic of where it will go. That's me personally, not talking for the RBC. But it is not going to diminish, in my opinion, the work that we've signed up to do.
Casey, if I may just be slightly more blunt for the sake of the conversation. In essence, Jeff, in my mind, the first outreach from us needs to be a positive, hey, we're here, we want to work with you, we want to be part of the process next year. And I don't want the first communication from us, should it have to be 6 months down the road where we aren't included, we aren't informed, we aren't part of the process, our plan is thrown out the window, to then send a nasty letter that is like, we're really frustrated and this is unacceptable and we're kind of in guns a-blazing. I'd rather have the first connection point from us be, we're here to be part of this process. I don't know about you, but this hasn't been just a joke use of my time, right? I drew a 4 out of the hat that first meeting, and I've spent a lot of time both investing in these meetings today and also externally, and I want that to be taken seriously. So that's the essence of this letter, is that we're not coming out saying, what the hell are y'all doing? It's, hey, we're excited about this, excited to see some action, want to be part of the process. There?
Well, the email I got from Bill Stengler sent to you, my impression was Water SC's replacing PPAC.
That's, I think, been stated.
Okay.
Yeah.
But again, I don't have a good feel that the requirements of the PPAC, all of the requirements, the PPAC's supposed to bless who's a part of our group. I don't know if Water SC is going to be doing that, or if they're just going to put it on to DES and let them do it. They could certainly do that. I'm not sure.
I think the PPAC had a charter which outlined what to do, I believe. I don't think there's been a charter prepared for Water SC, so maybe that's where some of the uncertainty is. And I don't know if Joe or anybody can really say what may fall under their purview without a written charter.
We invite them to our next meeting. Invite when? She came to our meeting.
Yeah. We can all, our meetings are as public as theirs, so absolutely. If we want to extend come join us, I'm fine with that.
If they're truly looking for other feedback as part of their broader outreach effort, the time is now.
I think they're speaking for a group that I know nothing about. They have a lot of work ahead of them in a short period of time. I would venture to say if I was on that group, I would be much more in tune to say, no, you come to our meeting, we don't have enough resources to send up everybody else's. That's just me. Gwen may say, would love to be there and we'll be here.
personally, I think it's an unrealistic schedule and they're not gonna. It's gonna be a kerfuffle.
They have a big, well, all right. So we already know that there has been a draft of what should be done. That was submitted back in the spring. So it's not like they're working from a blank slate. They are certainly working with an idea of where it needs to go. And that's through the past 10 years of seeing the pros and the cons of what we have in place.
So my thought on this is that Myra was moving towards a P-PAC type group, getting P-PAC together, not call it P-PAC.
Yeah.
The governor trumped her with his executive order, and now she is, well, obviously she's a direct report to the government. So she's on with this, but I don't think the P-PAC is dead at this point. I think that maybe she will try to, because she reached out, I think several people in this room to be technical advisors, because we didn't get on the official board. Scott Willett is the representative from the upstate for water utilities. But I do not think that this group is going to,
I agree.
is going to take the place of P-PAC.
Looking
And I
at
still
their
think-
charter and what the governor wrote, it's a different. Quite frankly, it's a different skill set needed to do the work at hand. Where the governor's group is much broader, and more diverse. So again, I think that may be a unintended consequence of going the route we're going, because that it's an executive order that will be done. So that is why I think it is important for the RBC, especially us, to be a presence in their discussions. So we have the tools we need to moving forward to implement the plan we come up with. My biggest concern is that there will be, and I feel very confident there will be things that are proposed that as a RBC, we may not support. Or may not be in line with our implementation plan. Or take precedent over our implementation plan. If there is an opportunity to have that discussion before we are put in that position, because we're at the table or they know that we are actively participating in this, I would prefer that. Because again, I see our work is not just coming up with the plan, but coming up with a plan that is workable and that we can actually do something. If it is not that, and we don't have commitment from our folks, our groups that we represent, and certainly legislators and DES and others, then we have unfortunately fallen in the path of a lot of governmental white hat things that may not turn out to white hat things.
And that's kind of, I guess, my concern about the letter is we have found ourselves here with a lot of unknowns as to what's happening on different levels. We're caught in the middle of a bunch of politics. And I mean, we're a group that was formed by the General Assembly, by the legislature a number of years ago to have a very long life.
Yeah.
And then last year, all of a sudden, the General Assembly decides that they're going to appoint an ad hoc water committee just out of the blue. Now the governors, by executive order, done all this. There's confusion if the P-PAC still exists or not. So we're in a little bit dangerous part. The whole thing's a problem.
Yeah.
And we just be careful. If all we're going to do is raise our hands and say, hey, we're still here, we're still working, we're still part of the system. If there's any way that we can help you, please feel free to call on us.
Yeah.
I'm okay with it. If it sounds the least bit confrontational, I'm not in favor.
That is not my goal, at all. It's certainly more the former of what you were saying. So why don't we send out a draft? Let everybody take a look at it. If it is a draft we're all comfortable with, we'll send it out.
I would say
I'd
if
like-
anybody objects, let Catherine or Casey know,
Yeah.
otherwise silence assumes you're good with it.
Yeah, I like the idea of not trying to do a big email, and I
Yeah,
do appreciate your suggestion, Rob, of getting it ahead of time, so let's shoot for. Let's just, 'cause Thanksgiving can be crazy, you want people to enjoy the holiday, so December 2nd, we can get a draft out. If you have strong feelings about it or opposition or wanna talk to Casey or I, you have to do that by Friday of that week. Which is the
I
6th.
figured she'd have it drafted by the end of the day, so.
We'll get it, yeah, I'll probably get you a draft today. I mean, we might be able to get it out sooner, but let's give ourselves some grace, and then we'll send it out the 9th. Well ahead of their 12th meeting, does that feel good?
Yeah. Good.
Very good. Thank you all very much.
Yeah, thank you.
Well, that's a little bit longer than I
Yeah.
thought,
Your
but
recommendations time.
So just to make sure we can follow this process, there was a motion.
I would,
and a second, and I would move that we accept the motion by acclamation, which basically says you don't need to take a vote.
Yes.
so moved, so made.
So
Second for that?
Second.
Tom will figure out how to make it.
Who were the first and second? Robert, were you?
I seconded the
Right.
motion.
Casey, real quick, I just for those that don't know, Ben Lord is Josie's alternate. He also now works with me, water hydrologist. I don't know if you want to just
Sure,
introduce
yeah.
yourself super quick, but.
Howdy all, yeah, water resource engineer, formerly with RTI International, have some experience working in the Catawba, their integrated water resources planning, mostly on the modeling side. Recently joined Bolton in May and excited to be here. Also wearing Friends of the Reed River hat, as Josie's alternate and also just concerned citizen of the watershed. So excited to be here. Thanks for having me, guys.
Very good, thank you. All right, Tom, let's turn it over to you.
Okay. We're gonna skip through the housekeeping items since we don't need to talk about them today. Public and agency comments. Any members of the public or agency folks want to make comment? Anybody online? Nope, okay. I might jump the agenda if Brandon is online. Okay. I'm gonna skip the next two agenda items. We'll come back to them. I want to dive into the recommendations, specifically the recommendations that we've discussed before about Luke Bowers and Brandon Peoples, so Clemson, USGS, their letter proposals that they submitted, which were originally requested by this RBC, to expand the flow ecology relationship study. So I think before the last meeting, I circulated this first proposal, which is to expand the analysis in the Blue Ridge province. And then the second one was for larger streams and rivers, which was this one. There were some questions that I couldn't answer during the last meeting, so Brandon's available now. And Michael, you had to leave early too, I think, when we were talking about these. Michael, do you have any questions? Does anybody else have questions about these proposals? And again, they relate to the recommendations that we were considering, which were basically these two. Support the funding of the joint USGS and Clemson proposal to quantify flow ecology relationships in the Blue Ridge, and then a separate one for the larger rivers. We also talked about a separate recommendation to make use of all the existing data that they currently have, and that's what you were stressing, Michael, is try to use that.
Yeah, I mean, DNR's been collecting data up there since the 80s. They're sitting on, in the last 4 years that I've been involved with it, they're now doing it species by species. For a long time, it was trout and everything else. Now, whatever we shock up, they count. So that data's sitting there. you know, they've been doing that longer than I've been involved in this process.
Well,
So,
are we referring to the ongoing Chattooga River sample?
yeah,
Right. Yeah, that is that's a really good data set, and we've talked about it. Thing is what this work relies on is it's called a space for time approach, which means that we have to have many locations located across an ecoregion that experience different levels of in-stream flow conditions. And so while that is certainly an excellent data set, it's really only on 2 or 3 sites, as I understand. And so it doesn't, while we could certainly incorporate that in our efforts, it doesn't give us the amount of spatial coverage across the Blue Ridge ecoregion that we would need to adequately develop relationships. So yeah, in short, we would plug that in, but it wouldn't be near enough.
So what can be done though with that data as an alternate, so that it's still being utilized in some form or fashion, I think is the question, right?
Okay, yeah, and I'm sorry if I've jumped in late to the conversation and, don't have the context. So I'm at a conference center right now. Yeah, I mean, that data could certainly be used to kind of look at how things have, or hopefully even haven't changed in the Chattooga at those 2 or 3 locations that it's done. There is gauge data at 2 sites, maybe 3, on the Chattooga. So you could certainly look at potential changes in stream flow over time and relate that back to those communities. Absolutely. But again, with only a few locations, even though that there have been many samples taken on those few locations, because it's only a few locations, just the sample size needed to detect any kind of statistical signal just isn't there.
So this is for additional fish sampling, right?
Correct.
I have some questions that are just kind of foundational to the whole approach here with the regards to the biological, and please just bear with me, I apologize. So DHEC uses macroinvertebrates. They use both, but macroinvertebrates as an indicator, and they are generally a better indicator for water quality and impairments, including hydrological impairments, because they are more sensitive to changes in environmental conditions. They're sessile, they can't move about, they have shorter life cycles. And there are biological indices that have been developed that are routinely used for that. And I think our approach here with the modeling was, and there's lots of, I think there's a robust macroinvertebrate data set throughout our basin. So we shouldn't be limited to just making recommendations based off of 4 sites that have robust enough fish and macroinvertebrate.
I think that's true with a bunch of the tribs in the Blue Ridge. They've been doing that over the years.
Yeah, I know, they've done it at my house.
And we say we can't do them as statistical indicators. Could we still use them as directional indicators?
The time period from the 80s to now is so short. I realize that may seem like a long time, but that has given us such a small data set that you don't know whether it was going up or going down prior to that. And that's my concern when you start doing some of these studies, is you're not going back to pre-water utilities, pre-wastewater utilities, and you're trying to make it a decision based on the last 50, 60 years, when that may not be the right way to do it. And that's always been my problem with looking at this, is that we're looking at such a small time frame in this data set. Because of the natural, I mean, it needs to go, we need to look at the natural flow, the natural when this has happened.
Yeah, let's give Brandon a chance to respond first, to, I think Melanie's first comment about use of the macro invertebrate data. I guess your question, why is that not being
So much
used?
emphasis on fish, when macroinvertebrates are a better indicator. Why are we using species richness when sensitivity and these biological indices are kind of the state of the art for doing water quality indications based on. I'm really confused by that, and I was very confused in reviewing chapter 5. I thought we were using both fish and macros, but then our results are for fish. And now we want more fish data. I don't know, I'm just.
Yeah,
I
Brandon,
apologize.
can you speak to that?
Okay, a lot of things to speak to there, so I'll try to do my best. So I think a couple things that I want to specify here is that we're only talking within the Blue Ridge ecoregion. So throughout the basin, there is plenty of data in the other ecoregions. It's just that because the data is limiting in the Blue Ridge ecoregion, it is not, there are not enough locations for us to be able to develop robust statistical relationships between in-stream flow factors and biological metrics. So I want to be clear, I'm specifically talking about the Blue Ridge ecoregion only. As to the fish versus insects, sorry, there's distracting in the background. As to the fish versus insects, we had two sets of models for all our in-stream flow work in all our basins and all our ecoregions. One that used macroinvertebrate indices and one that used fish indices, because both of those, as you say, can be informative. And some more so informative of others. Again, we're talking about water quality pollution. We're talking specifically about in-stream flow. And so both of those are advantageous to, so both fish and insects respond very clearly to in-stream flow, especially fish functional diversity. That is to say that the different morphologies of fish and that kind of thing. Right. And another thing I need to point out here is based on the different comments I'm hearing, is that this is a space for time approach. So what we are not doing, we're not going deep back into time and saying we have in-stream flow data from a long time ago, and we have biology data from a long time ago. What this whole work is based on is the fact that if you have a range of current in-stream flow conditions, some of which are degraded, some of which are high quality, it assumes it's baked in so that it is, say, okay, the degraded sections now represent what can happen if bad things happen to in-stream flow. And the quality stream sections now represent what happens if you conserve this. And so what you're doing is say, if we change these high quality locations to poor quality locations, this is the type of biological response that we would expect. So that's something I need to point out here as we're talking about data through time. And third, what our methods have done is that there are many in-stream flow metrics. There are many biological metrics, both aquatic invertebrates and fish. And so what our methods have done is we've sorted through all those potential relationships and identified only the ones that are most meaningful. And so sometimes that means that you get a very specific in-stream flow metric. Sometimes it just comes out to the most important thing is mean annual flow. Sometimes you get a very specific macroinvertebrate index, like the Megaloptera nodonata index or something like that. Sometimes it just comes down to straight taxonomic richness. And then that same could be said for fish metrics. Same thing could be said for aquatic invertebrate metrics. So it's not that we didn't consider those things. What we're presenting in our results is the statistical methods that identified the most clear and prominent results that are also actionable. On actionable flow metrics. So we didn't include things like a lot of high flow metrics and that sort of thing. So what you're seeing is the result of us parsing through all those things. And yeah, so sometimes the answer is mean annual flow and fish species richness. Sometimes the answer is the Julian date of the lowest flow date and the number of Plecoptera that we found. So it just depends.
Well, those are correlations that you identified, but that, correlation is not the same as causation. And I would just think that, in the absence of fish data, that we would still be able to look at the macroinvertebrate data in the Blue Ridge and elsewhere and draw conclusions, just like DES does when they make their 303D list. And I would be inclined to pick those metrics that are more standard for determining for indicating water quality, and those are those that are biotic indices that consider the tolerance of the different species. I mean, you could have a great species richness of very tolerant a population of very tolerant species, but your species richness is high.
That's right. And what you're saying is exactly what we've done.
Yeah, you've got to be careful about how you select and interpret those metrics. So EPT, NCBI, I mean, those aren't those sort of the state of the art for the biotic indices that are used as indicators for water quality. I mean, it doesn't seem like we need to be reinventing the wheel and looking at these where we have these correlations that may not be positive. And then saying, well, we've only got this limited data from these 4 sites, and we're going to extrapolate that basically, and we need some more fish data. I don't know.
Yeah.
I'm having a real hard time understanding that.
Let me offer a suggestion, because we don't have available time to talk about these 2 recommendations.
This is going
much more,
backwards.
right? I don't want to go backwards. I don't think there's anywhere near a consensus just to support these recommendations as written. I think what you need to do is learn more about it from Luke and Brandon and talk about what type of analysis that the Saluda RBC would support. So would you be comfortable just making a recommendation to further the conversation to figure out what additional analysis could be done, whether it's what's been proposed or something different, to help fill the data gap in the Blue Ridge?
I mean, I think to Mike's point, I want to know what the existing data tells us, because we've got a lot of it.
Okay, and maybe that's your recommendation.
Yeah.
But you got to think about who you're asking to analyze that data, who's going to do it. You can't just ask
got most
Brandon.
of it analyzed sitting there.
Well,
So,
if I could. I think to some extent, we're mixing water quality and water availability. And the metrics, Melanie, that you're talking about, yes, they are ideally suited for water quality. You are correct. That's what they're used for, is water quality. They aren't necessarily as applicable to quantity. And that is what this work is intended to do, in my opinion. Now, should it focus on fish or macroinvertebrates? That's a debate. I do agree that's a debate. Are there data available? That's a debate. So part of me says understanding flow, ecological flow requirements is a valuable aspect of a water availability of an organization that is intended to assess water availability and how water availability affects the different stakeholders. And one of the stakeholders being those who are supportive of natural resources conservation.
Well, the hydrologic impairment gets to that very issue, and that is why EPA put that forward, because they're looking for feedback on those reaches that are impaired, that are impaired, not meeting their designated uses for wildlife recreation, not due to a pollutant, but due to the lack of water. So those species, the populations, the type, abundance, and quality, all are reflective of the conditions, whether it be chemical or quantity. They exist because of their environment. So it's reflective of both.
Okay.
Right?
Yeah, we really can't spend more time talking about this.
Brandon had to check out.
Brandon had to leave. Okay, yep. So Melanie or Michael, do you want to make a recommendation to further the conversation so we can figure out what to do? What type of recommendation do you want to make? Otherwise, we're just gonna skip over these and there won't be a recommendation in the plan.
I think we need to further the conversation. And we also need to figure out what's sitting out there. I know that the fish data, I know who sits on that data at DNR. So, you know, need to contact that particular person and find out what her data sets are.
Here's where I'm at in our process. I think I'm all for gathering flow data. You know, I don't think there's anything wrong with understanding the flows and maybe what's causing the flows to change. Tying it at this point to ecology, I think we're getting ahead of ourselves. I agree, you know, that we kind of moved into.
You mean quality instead of ecology, or did you mean ecology?
Well, it says ecology up there, which I'm equating to quality.
No, we aren't the same.
Yeah, no, this is, I mean, this work that's been done in all the river basins by Brandon and Luke is specifically tying flow metrics to ecological health and kind of ignoring quality, water quality.
Right.
So that's what I'm saying. I'm not against gathering flow data.
Mhm.
It's just you gotta be careful what you're going to be comparing it to. What the implication of that flow is.
Okay.
Well, as I understand it, what these recommendations are do we want these two studies to better identify, not saying it's the best, it's, will these help identify what that flow ecology relationship is? Because right now, there's not a better offer. There's not somebody doing microinvertebrates. Should it be done? Possibly. But the folks that are doing it, they do fish. So we don't have another compelling group to say, oh no, we want to do it with microinvertebrates.
But DHEC does that as part of their ambient monitoring program.
Then we shouldn't be doing any of it.
Right.
That was sort of my point.
So.
Hey, everybody, if I may, and I'm sorry that internet here, I just kind of got knocked off. What I really need to specify is that because of this like space for time approach, it requires a certain number of locations to be able to develop these relationships. And so we're not saying that there's not data there, and we would certainly use any and all available data, absolutely, both for fish and aquatic insects. What we are saying is that there's not a sufficient amount of sampling sites to be able to develop those relationships at that time. While this proposal that we have only involves fish, there's no reason that we can't tack on aquatic invertebrates. I mean, I have several aquatic invertebrate projects going on in my lab right now. And I have people that work for me that's their job is to identify bugs. So it's not that we're trying to exclude it. It's just that we only did this for fish because that was kind of how the conversations had gone to. There's no reason that we couldn't include aquatic insects in this as well. So yeah, again, sorry I got kicked off and connectivity and stuff if I missed any of that.
And again, I'll just add to a little bit to that, is my understanding of the data collection is that this approach is that you're doing both the biology and the flow simultaneously. And yes, DHEC has lots of data, that is correct, but they do not collect flow data when they're out there doing their macroinvertebrate sampling. And they do not sample every station every year.
That's correct.
They sample stations based on their funding. And so they may have a lot of stations across the state, but they may have only done benthic macroinvertebrates 4 or 5 years out of all the years that it's monitored.
So agreement impairments are we talking about?
And can I also add here that I want to specify that all the flow data is already in hand. So I thought I might have seen Ben on the agenda, but the folks at RTI several years ago now estimated over 150 flow metrics for every single stream segment in the state of South Carolina. I won't get into all the details of that, but I can happily send the paper around on it. And so what that does is that gives us a huge variety of in-stream flow metrics to choose from at any place where we decide to dip a net or put a shocker in the water at anywhere in the state. And honestly, very few states actually have flow data that are anywhere near that rich. All the flow data is there. There just needs to be biological data at more sampling locations to develop the relationships for the Blue Ridge ecoregion. So, yeah, just wanted to clear that up.
It's a model flow data, correct? The waterfall model.
Correct.
So what's the magic number for the number of sites to make it statistically valid?
There is no magic number. That depends on the strength of the effect. So is it a very strong relationship between X and Y, or is it a very weak one? It goes around the variability of the effect, that kind of thing. I would definitely say, because ecological data for both for both fish and insects, it's messy, it's variable. I would start at least 50 locations would be like a starting point. And honestly, with what we've proposed, that would be, this is what Luke and I do. This is our daily thing, is sampling freshwater fish and insect communities. This would be more than adequate to get the sample size that we would need within the Blue Ridge ecoregion.
So Brandon and everybody else, I'm going to stop the conversation now, because I think we just need to make a decision. If you want to pursue additional analysis, expanding the study, figuring out how best to quantify ecological flow relationships in the Blue Ridge, we can add a recommendation, kind of like the one we've got here, further the conversation. If you're comfortable leaving it as is and just moving on, not having a recommendation geared around this, then we'll do it that way. So two options I see. So we're not cutting it off unless you decide, yeah, we've talked about this enough. We've got some information in the plan, but we're not ready to move forward. Don't even really want to continue the conversation, then we won't have one in there. Or we can have just a general recommendation to continue this conversation, because there's a lot of questions.
I like that.
You want to continue the conversation? Okay.
I would like to at least keep that.
Okay.
And if it means cutting it off there to keep it, that's what I propose.
Okay.
Let's just move on.
Okay, so I've got a motion to add this recommendation about furthering the conversation. Michael had a second. All in favor of that?
Hold on, you're getting ahead of my brain. So are you talking about not having one, not having two, only having three?
Exactly. We're getting rid of these
Yeah,
two because
yes.
we're not ready to make those recommendations yet.
That's what we're saying.
We're basically just saying, during your implementation, you'll continue to talk to Brandon and Luke and look at the existing data, figure out what could be done. So,
Yeah.
all in favor of that approach? I'm seeing the majority of hands in the room. What about online folks? Raise your hand or put in the chat if you're in favor of that. We don't need consensus here. We just need majority.
I got one thumbs up and a hand raised.
Well, I think I saw enough hands in the room, so we'll craft a recommendation along the lines of this one. Thank you, Brandon, for your time. I appreciate it. And we'll continue the conversation as they get into their implementation.
Yeah, thank you everybody for having me. And I'll be happy to, it seems like there were a lot of details that might have needed explaining and that kind of thing. So if you decide to move forward with the conversation, I'll be happy to talk in a little bit more formal setting about what this kind of thing is, what it's not, what it addresses and how it addresses it and that kind of thing. So.
Okay. All right, let me go back then on the agenda, and we'll do these next two agenda items pretty quick and then take a short break. Actually, you know what? It's already 11:06. Let's do a break and then we'll come back to these. So 10 minutes, 9 minutes, maybe 11:15 on my phone. 9 minutes. 9 minutes. It's actually when we're getting close to lunch too, so. 11:15 we'll adjourn. Comments on chapters 5 and 6, as Casey noted, are due on the 25th. We've already got some comments from Rebecca, Rob, Melanie. I'm missing somebody. We've got 3 or 4 sets of comments already on 5 and 6. So you have until the 25th. I'm really going to encourage you to submit them by the 25th. I can't keep extending the deadline for folks because for chapter 4, we kept going back and back as we got new comments. So you need them to get them to me by the 25th. You don't get them to me by the 25th, I can't promise that we're going to address them. I do want to talk quickly about just a couple of quick comments that Rebecca made that were more big picture. One was on chapter 5. And it was in reference to a comment that Melanie made back at our October meeting about safe yield. We've discussed safe yield in the context of safe yield for reservoirs. There's also safe yield in terms of what's written into the Surface Water Act and how it's defined there. And Rebecca's comment was that should we be looking at that type of safe yield in the rivers and streams as well? And Rebecca, that really wasn't something that was contemplated as part of the planning framework. So that's generally the first answer why we didn't look at that. And that's not to say that the RBC could request that, hey, what's the safe yield at a point in the river system? I mean, we could do that analysis. DES does that analysis when they go to permit withdrawals. They don't necessarily use the SWAN model, correct? But you could. How do you do it?
Yes, I mean, I think the SWAN model is a tool utilized to do that.
Yeah, okay. So I'm not sure if that answers your question.
Well, I guess I'm just wondering if, I mean, I know there's a lot of recommendations being thrown around right now, and this one might be a little bit harder to define if we want to include it, but I wonder if it would be worth it to have it as a recommendation that we want to do further analysis utilizing this SWAN model, looking at safe yield within this context, not just in reservoirs going forward. Because, as we go to implement this plan and also working more technically with the Surface Water Withdrawal Act and addressing safe yield, I think it's important that we see the impact on the watershed or on the basin in a more holistic way related to safe yield, not just in reservoirs.
Okay, so maybe keep that thought when we talk about policy, regulatory, and legislative. You can potentially put that as a recommendation. Melanie.
Let me see if I have this right. With regards to chapter 5 and what y'all did was looking at reservoir safe yield and looking at your definitions up front. I don't think you did reservoir safe yield based on what is in the law, right? You did.
Correct.
Reservoir safe yield is the surface water supply for reservoir system, reservoirs, et cetera. And that surface water supply is the maximum amount of water that occurs 100% of the time.
Right.
Right.
Yes.
So
this is nothing about the law.
So it's really nothing about the law.
Right. Yeah. Okay.
I want to make sure I was clear on that.
Yes. And if that needs to be made clearer in chapter 5, we can do that.
I got it when I read it.
Okay. All right. Okay. So keep that thought in your head.
But that's a good point that Rebecca made. River safe yield. That would be interesting to look at it, or there are different notes.
Another comment that Rebecca made, actually, this is not on chapter 5, as the title says, it's on chapter 6, but it had to do with, and I mention it because it's similar to some comments that Rob had made, and as you all review chapter 6, you may have similar questions or comments. It had to do with the water management strategy, reclaimed water programs, and how we how we characterized it as being potentially having high or adverse effects, or potential low adverse effects, or positive effects, or high to moderate positive effects, basically whether we gave it a green or a red shading or left it white. And I think your comment was that, well, with regard to PFAS and reclaimed water, if it's not removed and then you're reusing that, could be an issue.
Yeah. I think it was just like how, at least in the version that I read, the whole thing for reclaimed water and the other water quality considerations was green, even though it had PFAS in there.
Yeah.
As being an outcome of being recycled in the water resources and microplastics. So I've suggested that they be broken out like you see here,
Yeah,
where
so-
we have it more obvious, like what is good about it and what is not.
Exactly, yeah. So, and I kind of bring this up because a lot of this, of what we've done in chapter 6 on this table is subjective as to whether there's a net neutral effect or slightly positive or negative, because, you know, there's like under water quality considerations, you can see both, and you gave a good example here. I mention this because as you read it, try not to get too caught up, but if you really strongly feel that we've mischaracterized the level of adverse effect, let us know. Robert, you have some comments on that I haven't really looked at closely yet, but we'll take them into consideration. But again, remember that these are kind of subjective. We want to best be your voice, but others may have different opinions, so. Okay. Those were the only two things I wanted to bring up with regard to chapters 5 and 6.
I had some comments on chapter 5, if it's not too late.
No, it's not too late.
Okay.
Are there comments that you want to discuss with the full RBC or? Sure, go ahead.
It's just really in the way the data is presented in the different scenarios. So we did not assume a we did not establish a surface water condition.
Correct.
Right. So essentially, I mean, I think my comment, which I passed you this morning, my comments, sorry, was with regards to this, and this carries through for all of the model results as they're presented. It seemed like they need a footnote, or at least maybe just say this up front. It should be clearly stated that model results lacking a surface water condition assumes 0 as the boundary for water available for withdrawal. In other words, it assumes that there are no minimum in-stream flow boundary conditions other than the demand itself. This condition ignores the need to provide an adequate supply of water at the surface water withdrawal point to maintain the biological, chemical, and physical integrity of the stream, taking into account the needs of downstream users, recreation, navigation. I know we did the minimum in-stream flow analysis and all of that, but the way these shortages are presented, it's the percent shortage from the demand, assuming that, you know, we can take it down to 0.
Correct.
Right. So it's a little bit, I just feel like that could be misleading to the reader that is not as deep into it as we are, and so maybe a footnote somewhere. Or I actually suggested footnotes on every single one that this is, you know, not considering minimum in-stream flow boundary conditions.
Okay. Any thoughts from the RBC about that comment? Would anybody be opposed to adding a note so that when folks review the tables, they understand that the RBC did not establish a surface water condition? So all of the values that we're giving assume that you can bring flow down to 0, and that's when we identify a shortage. And our shortages are with respect to water supply withdrawals. We're not, until we get to the parts in chapter 5 where we present the results of the ecological flow analysis, we're not talking about water needs for aquatic health.
Is that not addressed in the verbiage? I saw Melanie's note and I'm fine with that.
I think Melanie's point is it needs to be stated clearly, and she was recommending maybe on every table. I would rather do it, make it more obvious up front at the beginning of the chapter, or maybe even in the summary section of the chapter as well. I prefer not to make it a footnote on every table.
Yeah, I suggested more, you know, language up front, and then it was just a suggestion of a brief footnote on every table, and then also to carry that over into the final, you know, recommendations of what as well. So look at my suggestions there.
Okay, and I apologize, I haven't looked at your comments
Kind
yet.
of disappointing. So.
Yeah, that's okay. All right. Okay, any other comments on that? Okay. Chapter 7, I don't have a draft ready yet for you. I want to tell you what is in chapter 7. I'm hoping to send that out maybe next week. But there's a little bit of further discussion I wanted to have with the RBC. Chapter 7 presents the water management strategy recommendations. Okay. Now, if you remember, we didn't identify any shortages, at least in terms of water supply shortages in our high demand and our high demand 2070 scenario. So we talked about water management strategies more as kind of things that we agree should be done. We've developed a list of agricultural strategies, and this discussion was back in our March meeting, I think. So generally all of the ag strategies were supported. We didn't prioritize them. We spent more time talking about the municipal portfolio of strategies, and we actually removed some because we didn't think they're really worthwhile. They just don't apply to this basin too much, or there's no need to really emphasize them. Toilet rebate, car wash recycling, water efficiency standards, some of that's already being taken care of. We left these other ones as supporting them, but we didn't prioritize any of them. Let me back up then to what's supposed to be in chapter 7. Selection, prioritization, and justification of each recommended water management strategy. Again, we're developing a kind of a portfolio of good practices, basically B&Ps. And that's the approach we've taken so far, but we didn't prioritize any of them. I want to make sure you all want to attempt to prioritize any of these strategies, at least in terms of higher priority, lower priority, or first priority, and everything else could just be done. Or do you want to just say we support all these and it's up to each utility or user or customer to implement them as funding and necessity allows?
I'm more prone to go to the global solutions for local problems.
Yeah.
Agreed.
Okay, that's in line with the limited discussion we had back in March.
Yeah.
I just wanted to make sure before I wrote this up that truly was the way we wanted to go. Any other opinions on that? Everybody comfortable with kind of writing this up? One of these may apply more to different utilities. And let me give you one example from the Upper Savannah RBC. Scott Willett made a big push that, well, public education, water conservation specifically is the most important. You need to start with that. So he said that should be the highest priority. Everybody should be doing that. And the Upper Savannah RBC generally agreed. So they put that one slightly above everything else. But again, I'm just telling you what that example was. I'm not trying to say that that's what you should do. It's up to you guys.
Yeah, I saw this thing, I had it up for the longest time and now I've lost it. I'll try to find it again, but it ranked the different states as to how well they do water conservation.
Yeah, actually, I just read that report a couple of weeks ago.
Oh,
Water Alliance or something.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's pretty interesting. I was thinking about sending it out to you all, but I didn't want to take steps back.
The bottom line was we didn't do so well.
Yeah, you're right in the middle, basically. It's like the 28th or something, I think, from the criteria that they had. Yeah.
We weren't great.
We're great, we're bad, kind of in line with all the other southeastern states except Georgia, because they got a lot of points for their water loss control program and some other programs. And I can circulate that if y'all are interested in seeing it. I don't, ES, do you know, are you aware of it or?
It's a national level.
It's a national level by Water Alliance.
Sure, I mean, I'd be interested in seeing it. I'm not aware of it.
Okay.
It would support those, help support those recommendations.
Yeah, yeah.
So I would have to agree with Scott. I mean, I like the public education, water conservation up top. I just had to ask why we removed 4, but those are already in effect and there's not much more you can do about them. But I do like that one as number 1. And the conservation pricing structure is going to happen in the upstate, probably maybe not in my lifetime. But at some point, we're gonna have to have tiered pricing in our water utilities.
Yeah.
Which will then preserve the water supply even longer. But and then on that third one, leak detection and water loss for Greenville Water, we're spending a lot of money to find no leaks. And it just depends on how well your utility was managed in the past. We still have a leak detection program, but we spent a lot of money over the last 4 or 5 years and realized that
You don't have a problem.
we don't have a problem, and we're just gonna do the normal leak detection things.
Yeah.
So so I would agree, obviously, being a water utility, I think the public education is key.
Right. So the upper Savannah also agreed that conservation pricing structures or a drought surcharge were higher priority. So both public education and that one, they prioritized higher than the remaining ones. They felt a lot of the remaining ones were important, especially maybe for certain utilities that are older and have a lot of water loss and need that infrastructure improvement. But those were the two that they supported the most, and they generally said, let's assign a higher priority to them, emphasize them greater. So that's kind of what I'm hearing. You're saying, you're not necessarily saying that, though. You think it's site specific. Yeah.
Rick Huffman suggested watershed education needs to be the top priority.
Yeah, so it sounds like Rick agrees with what Jeff is suggesting.
Well, education is always a great thing, and you can't be opposed to that. You know, so I don't have a problem with putting that as a priority. When you start talking about concentrated pricing structures and most of the rest of that stuff there, maybe we're just getting into telling the management of these water companies and stuff, how they should and shouldn't operate. I mean, these are, certainly priorities of a water company. If they're losing a bunch of water out there, they want to know it.
Yeah.
Unless you're.
Yeah, I think that's Casey's point, is let the utilities decide what's best for them. On a general note, we think these are good ideas, but again, it's utility specific, so.
Yeah, that would be my position.
Yeah, okay. But let me see a show of hands, including online folks. Do you want to emphasize public education as one of the higher priority items and then leave everything else to be local solutions, local decisions?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes, yes, yes. You can't shake your head. You said no already, so.
I would consent.
Okay. Opinions on yes?
Yes,
Charlotte?
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, yes.
All right, so that's what we're gonna do. We're gonna just emphasize this as a higher priority and everything else follows. Okay. We didn't spend very much time at all talking about industrial energy conservation efficiency strategies. The limited amount of time we discussed this, you just expressed support for all of these, but again, said that's kind of specific to the utility or the industry. So that's how we're going to write this one up as well, unless anybody thinks we need to dive into this a little more. That was the discussion we had here as well. Okay, good. All right. The two other items that get mentioned or addressed in Chapter 7 are remaining issues regarding designated reaches of interest. We have what qualifies as a reach of interest, which is that hydrologically impaired section downstream of Saluda Lake. We haven't made a lot of progress on tackling that, in part because we're trying to get a conversation going for power that really hasn't gone anywhere. My suggestion is to make some recommendations and continue to address this subsequent to development of this plan. But Kevin and Melanie, do you guys do you want to spend more time on it now?
I'm okay addressing it in the plan.
You mean addressing as a recommendation for future work, basically? But without having that conversation, we can't really make much progress, I think. We don't know what they're willing to do or not do.
Well, I've been ruminating on this quite a bit. I think the goal of the RBC is to not have any hydrologically impaired sections of the Saluda River, and its tributaries. So I think having a recommendation that we continue to work with and pursue how to resolve that is appropriate. What that looks like, I don't know, because from what I can tell, once it was put on the list, there hasn't really been much work to say, should it still be on the list? Is there anything being done to relook at the problem? So it kind of got put on the list and there it sits.
Just like the rest of the impairments.
So I think there should be an active engagement to address this concern.
Not to throw a wrench into this, but we put forward 5 petitions to DHEC. I think 3 of them were hydro based, 1 was the Edisto ag withdrawals, and 1 was urban, the Reedy. I think it was an 8-mile section below the city of Greenville. And using the data from the Saluda Reedy Watershed Consortium that demonstrated peak flows were getting higher, low flows were getting lower. And that constituted a hydrologic impairment in that reach. And DHEC agreed with that behind the scenes. But they didn't agree to list it for political reasons. So in other words, the science was there to support that hydrologic impairment designation. And the thinking behind that one really was that that would be fuel for better stormwater management and ordinances that did green infrastructure and all these wonderful things to help keep water in the soil instead of running off so quickly. So would the RBC entertain the idea of adding another reach of interest for hydrologic impairment?
Does the RBC think about that?
And I'd be glad to share that petition with y'all that illustrates all that.
I think that's not to speak for the RBC, but that is getting into a different realm than what I think we were created to do. Just me personally, that I think we are like I say, my goal is to try to get things off of this and to improve so they're not on this. I'm not a huge fan of, oh, we gotta make stuff crappy before we address it. And the only way we make it crappy is do a study, prove it's crappy with the limited data we have, and then get it put on a list. And like you say, then it sits there on the list. I'd much rather actively work to address a concern without having to put our head on a chopping block.
And when I look at the gauge below Boyd Mill Pond, I see the same type of stuff happening.
Probably
rather
than a lot of dams.
But well, I mean, it's also by Northbrook, but
Yeah.
but it's and there's not a gauge below Holiday Dam, which is why I propose adding it, but I guess I haven't jumped at adding those. Because my hope is the solution, but that's also why when I talk about solutions, I tend to generalize it to the other sides, if that makes sense as well. It gets to solving the problem, not adding to the list.
I mean, our group recognized right up front that really, if we went down and looked at all the rivers across the state, a big percentage would be hydrologically impaired for one reason or another, whether it's hydro operations, whether it's, too big withdrawals from whatever user, whether it's, urbanization and land use changes or channel operations. Years ago, we moved tributaries in a big way, ways for farming, and we channelized and straightened them. And now they're no longer hydrologically connected to their floodlines. And it's a real problem. We're trying to find money to restore them and reconnect them. So, that's just one that happened to make the list. So there's, I guess the thinking is would it provide, a justification for some of those actions that we have talked about? We've talked a lot about stormwater and green infrastructure and all these things that we need to do with development going forward. That is, it's not to get it on a list to provide a hammer, it's to provide, justification for good policies and practices going forward.
Kevin, you look like you're gonna say something.
But I'm not gonna disagree if everybody doesn't want to add something to the list. I'm just.
I don't know if I'm supporting or opposing what you're saying. I think I would rather go after recommendations for good stormwater management practices than trying to go down to creating the list of every river in the watershed that's impacted by stormwater management, because I think that's going to turn out to be everything.
Yeah, I don't.
So I'm kind of like going against adding it to the list, but I think I still support. I would still support a proposal for recommendations for stormwater management practices.
Okay, yeah, I think we do have some of those. We'll get to those in a minute. Okay.
Let me ask a question.
Yeah.
What's the definition of hydrologically?
4C of the Clean Water Act.
Yeah.
What?
4C of the Clean Water Act, so.
And that's still brief.
Yeah, I think Thompson needs a little better definition than clean water.
It's like, it's a form, yeah. Go ahead.
In this case, in the cases I think it was imposed, it was a bit of a dam, the operation of a hydrologic project was the clear cause of preventing navigation of the waterway, that they were shutting it off. There was no flow in the river, and you had a tubing operation that was operating there, and people just had to pick up their tubes with no warning and
Walk back to the car.
walk down the river. And so to me, the solution, a practical solution is to do like for people here who deal with FERC from the power companies, it's a bit of they all have negotiated minimum flows that they have to do to make sure that if someone's canoeing downstream, that they've got at least enough flow. And it also protects farmers, because if you've got a water pump intake, it makes sure that there's some water in the river for you to pump out and water your fields. And so to me, it's kind of a unique situation where it went from being, these all went from being FERC licensed dams to being state licensed dams, and the state's really not set up for that.
So in plain speak, a hydrological impairment is some action that causes the hydrology of the river to change such that that river does not meet its designated use. And that may still be jargon, but every water has a designated use. And if the water does not meet its designated use, it is impaired for that designated use. And one way to back into it is if you find water that's impaired for designated use and you look at all of the various water quality parameters and it meets those water quality criteria, but it has some hydrological, there's some upstream hydrological effect, then you could sort of deduce that hydrological effect is the cause of the impairment, such as a hydroelectric dam that only releases during peak flows. And you can see this on some rivers where you can see this on a river that was used in the 2000 Olympics for whitewater rafting. The Coe River, I believe it is.
Yes.
Where When those hydro dams are not running, that river is dry as a bone. When those hydro stations are running, that river is a wonderful whitewater stream. So you could say that is a hydrological impairment, because when the dams aren't running, the river does not meet its designated uses.
I think did I share the one-page fact sheet that we developed? Did I share that? And so the guidance, it says that examples of hydrologic alteration include a perennial water is dry, no longer has flow, has low flow, has standalone pools, has extreme high flows, or has other significant alteration of the frequency, magnitude, duration, and rate of change of natural flows in a water, or a water is characterized by entrenchment, bank destabilization, or channelization. And then there's a report that they point to, this EPA USGS technical report, protecting aquatic life from the effects of hydrologic alteration. So they have put, words around what it means, ideas around what it means, but it is relatively new. The states are not, it's not as routine as, the water quality impairments.
Well, and this is the only one in the state.
Only one in the state.
Only one listed.
Okay, any other questions about this one? I think what we'd like to do then is write up a short section identifying this as a reach of interest because it's the sole 4C one in the state. I think it qualifies. And then we'll include a recommendation about continuing active engagement with Northbrook Power to address it, see what they're willing to do. That conversation hasn't happened, but we'll
Not for lack of one.
We'll put it in the implementation plan.
I don't know if someone knows this. I haven't gone looking dam by dam. Maybe someone from the state does. Are any of the dams on the Broad not regulated by FERC? Are they all regulated by FERC or?
Scott,
On the Broad, Lake Bowman's not FERC regulated.
Is it?
on the broad main stem or just in the Broad Basin?
I was thinking in the Broad Basin that are used for hydropower,
Yeah,
which are not.
Spartanburg's hydropower facility is not.
Okay.
Yeah, Laylock isn't.
And they
But
have,
they impact somebody.
they have hydro facilities. They're not just a water.
They have a minimum release though. They do.
Yeah, but I was thinking they were, I didn't think they had a hydroelectric facility there.
They have a small one.
Okay.
Have one there.
Okay.
I'm not saying there's not a small one on one of the tributaries, but I'd have to look into it.
But on the main stem, they're all FERC regulated, I think. Okay. But that's what I thought.
But even Spartanburg's has minimum releases they have to abide by.
Right,
It's an
right.
agreement with the state.
Right, there's which is where I think I thought we were unique here on these three facilities, but I wasn't 100% certain, and I was pretty sure if there were exceptions, it would be in the Broad Basin, maybe the Catawba, but I was suspecting the Broad just from the nature of there's a lot of old, probably marginally profitable dams in the Broad River Basin, whereas I think the Catawba is mostly Duke Energy, and they're pretty major type of, they're pretty major operations.
I'm curious, what would y'all want? Continuous minimum flow or a timed release?
Well, it kind of goes back and different people have different opinions, but it gets back to really, I think what I would like to see is that they're always releasing a minimum in-stream flow. And that's where you get into the debate of how you define a minimum in-stream flow. There were some, in the legal definition, there was in some of these things, there were studies that said 35 to 38% is the minimum navigable flow. So with in a FERC licensing program, they'd go do that, and they might say there's a few ways about it, but probably in somewhere like this, what we would say is, hey, we want a minimum of 30% of the mean annual daily flow, or 35% of the mean annual daily. What I was hoping was I had looked at the gauge there that's not too far downstream of the dam, and I had plotted kind of the average daily flow over the different months of the year. And I saw even like in August and September, And obviously you have days and years, but on average over the years, they've got 60% of, the mean annual daily flow is what's going through, you know, in the driest months of the year. So in my mind, asking for 30 to maintain a minimum in-stream flow of 30 to 40% shouldn't be, it still allows them some fluctuation. Now in drought years, they're gonna, you have to put the exceptions for like lake drawdowns, and we talked about that some here, but just what I was kind of hoping we could get to was a dialogue with them where maybe, and I can't say my hoping was really, I thought would happen, but I was hoping we get to some dialogue, ideally with some transparency, where we can talk about, hey, what are the needs? You know, what are your needs? Better understanding their needs. And looking at, hey, maybe you could go down a little bit at my, you know, to me, that's what I was hoping at, was to better understand their needs and to make it so that they're minimally impacted, you know, that there's water there for recreation, and that that their business was minimally impacted. That's what I was hoping.
Okay. All right, we're gonna dive back into recommendations. It's already 11:51 and lunch is here. I think what we'll do is a working lunch. Might as well, should go ahead and break now before we start into the recommendations again. 15 minutes or 10 minutes, is that enough to get lunch and get back to your
Okay,
seat?
rude, sit down, we gotta work today, sorry.
So online folks, we're gonna try to start back up probably
I'll take the fall with my suggestion, but John agreed.
Yeah. 5 to 10 after, maybe as early as 5 after. It just depends on how quickly we go through the lunch line. So be sure to sign the sign-in sheet again when you get your lunch, and try to get back to your seats. We'll work through recommendations.
A few other things on your list.
Okay. While you all finish your lunch, we're gonna dive back into recommendations. The good news is we have a fair number of green bucket recommendations that I'm not gonna review because we've already approved them. That were in the Word document that I circulated before the meeting. Hope you all had a chance to review those, but they touch on a number of different issues: funding, resiliency, membership, addressing uncertainties, climate monitoring, water quality, sedimentation, building technical capacity, filling data gaps. There's still a handful of ones that we wanted to further consider, and those are our yellow bucket recommendations. I want to go through those pretty quick because we want to spend most of our time talking about this last group, which is policy, regulatory, and legislative recommendations, especially in the light of the fact that what I said earlier in the meeting is that we'd like to summarize each council's recommendations on this topic to provide to Water SC for their December 12th meeting. So what I'm proposing to do to efficiently and quickly get through our remaining yellow bucket recommendations is to basically address each recommendation, take no more than a minute or two of comments, and then do an up or down vote. I talked with Casey already. Casey said that, yeah, let's just do an up or down vote. If we have a majority, we'll note that. If we have consensus, that's even better. We'll note that there's consensus. But if we can get at least a majority, we will include the recommendation and we'll note that it was voted on by a majority of the RBC, but there was not consensus. Everybody okay with that approach? Okay, that'll help us get through the rest of these recommendations. And again, you'll have the opportunity to do a final vote on the draft plan. And if a handful of recommendations get through that you didn't support, but the majority of the RBC supported it, that might suggest that you give the overall plan, when you rank it on that 1 to 5 scale, as not completely fully supporting it, but you can live with it. So it's kind of how the process works.
Since we're actually making decisions, just the technical question here. Do we have a quorum requirement for this?
Yeah.
Have we met it for today?
We have, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, we.
But every time, because we have the best representation. We have really good attendance.
You do have good attendance, yep. We always check the quorum at the beginning of the meeting to make sure we got it. I don't think we've had a RBC meeting in any of the councils where we didn't have a quorum.
I can't recall. I don't think so.
Yeah, I don't think so either. So
Pretty low.
it's half. Well,
It's half.
Just over half. Yeah. All right. Okay, groundwater resources. We have a recommendation that in future planning phases, the RBC recommends understanding the potential impacts of private and community commercial wells and how they affect surface water, especially during droughts, and or better characterized growth potential. Any final comments or questions on that one?
Why do we even have it?
Why do we have it?
I mean, the Piedmont, it's mostly fracture type of aquifers and everything. I don't even see the reason why it's up there.
Yeah.
So I would encourage that just because there are hundreds of non-community, non-transient public water systems in the upstate that rely on wells.
Right, but it's all fracture type of geology, so it's all isolated.
Understood.
So what it does is it impacts stream base flow,
Right.
small trips and stuff. And there have been studies, and I did one in Wake County, North Carolina, because there's 200 and so community systems around the city of Raleigh that are in donut holes. Where there's not incorporated towns and there's not public water supply from surface water. And those collectively do have an impact on stream flow. What was the question?
Do we have a list of those hundreds of well systems?
I don't, because DES probably knows where the community and non-community systems are.
DES does and EPA maintains a database of water systems, public water systems.
Yeah, no,
that
You're
data.
talking about like trailer parks and stuff, or you talking?
Trailer parks, summer camps,
They're not like, it's not sure.
Right.
It's on the water atlas, right?
Yeah, I believe it is.
There are also like utilities in our basin that are looking at like having
Groundwater.
studies done to determine if they can use groundwater for redundancy. Like that's actively happening today, so.
Star Isles.
That's part of the reason why. it's on there.
Okay.
Seems kind of odd.
Yeah.
Seems odd for the upstate.
I don't know, talk to Patrick, he's not here, again, every time this topic comes up, he's mysteriously not around. Unless he's on.
Yeah, he did let me know he wouldn't be here.
Yeah, fair enough.
He's at a conference or something.
All right. Discussion period's over for this one. Show of hands, who would like to see this recommendation? Got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Online, folks, 2, 8, 9. All right, got 9 for it.
Yes.
No, that's the same too.
Same one, okay, we got 9 for it. Who would rather not include this recommendation? 1, 2, did you vote, Jay, or no?
Use the last thing, I'll say that.
Oh, no, then, yeah, 1, 2, 3, 4. Online,
I got one more yes.
one more, yeah, okay, so I think
10-4.
it's 10-4, majority wins, but we'll note that there was not consensus.
Do I sense the consensus? Maybe that's the wrong word. Seems like people think it's practice, but not necessary for our watershed. Is that what I'm feeling?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, this is not one that we're gonna die on.
I didn't really want to approach to the concept. What I'm sensing is
Right.
the opposition's coming from it's not necessary for a watershed.
Right.
Yeah.
I think
I
that's
don't know if that's worth clarifying.
Right. So that'll be noted. It's gonna be a lower priority on the implementation plan. It'll be maybe future years, near the end of the 5-year implementation plan or something. Okay. The next one was improving public education and outreach. Saluda RBC to support and promote outreach and education, increasing awareness for the general public around the watershed-based planning. And then we listed some actions that could be taken. I don't remember the specific discussion of why we kept this one in a yellow bucket and didn't close the book on it.
I bet you a more broader version of this that we could just consider instead of having to like have the multiple public.
And I think there was some debate or question as to what the individuals on the RBC responsibilities might be to implement this. That just putting it in a paper, in a report was one thing. And then no one ever did anything with it. You know, I think the feeling was if we're gonna put it there, it means we as individuals might ought to be really taking some ownership of the implementation. That's where I saw the hesitancy come up.
Like, do you want me to read mine?
Yeah, I was trying to find that,
Okay.
but go ahead and read it.
Yeah, it's not Monday. So I proposed simplifying it and then having in the implementation matrix, some of these more specific tools that are available and just saying that the Saluda RBC will support and promote outreach and education to increase awareness of the general public around watershed-based planning. And then in the implementation, talk about Coco Ross, Seymour, Dot to Stream, partnering with the new Water SC to come up with a statewide educational strategy, et cetera.
Yeah, okay, so I did have the language here, I just put it all as the recommendation.
Oh, did you? Okay,
Yeah.
Okay.
So, but I should explain, everything highlighted in gray is what you were suggesting.
I was
the
saying not
actions in
in
the
the
implementation plan.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Take that out, because it's too complicated.
Well, it's important though, because if you're gonna make the recommendation, then you're gonna need something to, you need this in your implementation plan, and that's what you were
Right.
suggesting, so they go hand in hand.
Well, but we haven't done the implementation for any of the other recs, so.
No, yeah,
Arguably, we don't have to agree on those bullet points right now, but we have to agree on is that top phrase.
right,
And we
In my
said,
opinion.
we say may, so. Even if you don't agree with the bullet point, that doesn't mean it's, unless you're absolutely, if you're uncertain about it, it's.
right.
Okay,
So
yeah, sorry.
forget about the actions that are in gray now, and just consider the first part, because we'll get to the actions later, and you may not agree that we want to specify what's listed there. So just considering the Saluda RBC will support and promote outreach and education to increase awareness around watershed-based planning. Now, I forget if I've asked this before, but that was language you proposed, and you specifically said watershed-based planning. Are you differentiating that from water supply planning? Are you suggesting, watershed-based planning like the watershed-based plans that are done for DES in that program?
Thank you. I like it broad because what people don't appreciate is how a watershed is like a zip code for water, right? So at baseline, we need to increase awareness about what even a watershed is and then how you can plan for it in all ways, whether it's quantity, quality, et cetera, because we should be forward thinking about our public outreach shouldn't be limited to this singular plan as it stands alone, especially because so many of the things that do exist as tools in our toolbox are not singular in nature in what they promote. And so I don't want to bind ourselves to saying we're only going to support education that talks about water quantity, period.
Yeah.
Right? So that language was intentional on my part.
Okay.
Can you reference the South Carolina watershed atlas in there too?
Under the bullet points,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, absolutely. I think that's a great suggestion.
And I don't know if this is the appropriate place to stick this, but I would just really love to see those watershed assessments come back. I don't know if it belongs in this recommendation. We talked about it. Those I know they're water quality, but they have quantity related things in them too. And the atlas was, they say now replaces those, but it's I'll say that for you. Maybe.
Yeah, let's get into that during implementation.
I think that might belong there.
Okay, any other discussion about the highlighted, very overarching public education and outreach around watershed-based planning recommendation? Before we take a vote, go ahead.
So again, we are voting for the gray.
Voting for the gray, we're gonna address the actions as part of the implementation plan discussion later. No more discussion. Okay, all in favor of including that recommendation? Haley, are you opposed to it?
Not opposed, sorry.
Okay.
That was the Big news from the chamber.
So I think everybody's in favor of it. So let me ask the easier question. Is anyone opposed to it? Online, I'm looking to you guys too.
Lots of yeses and agrees.
Okay. This one has consensus. All right. We'll come back to those actions later. Alignment with other plans. For river basins with state or federal specially designated streams, for example, the scenic rivers or the state scenic rivers program, watershed-based plans and any other similar plans, the RBC should assess alignment with or between the river basin plan and the management plan associated with that special designation.
I thought we agreed you were gonna tackle that in some sort of intro portion of the.
We are, it's gonna be, I don't want to say short, but we're gonna make an attempt to it. I kept it in here because I thought the recommendation was for maybe all RBCs, not just the Saluda RBC, to kind of do that, and it hasn't always been done in the other RBCs.
Yeah, we should avoid contradicting ourselves. I support
Yeah,
that.
that's, to me, this is something, if we say it, we should just do it. But I don't think we've done it yet.
Any other discussion on this one? So again, we are doing it as part of chapter 1. We're going to have a discussion of the other plans in the basin, and we'll try to identify if there's any disagreement between them. But it's not, I'm not going to promise it's going to be a comprehensive review of every plan's recommendations and every aspect of every plan in alignment with ours. It'll be a bigger picture.
And I guess it could be something we agree to review in this body after the report goes out, too.
Yeah, that's part of the problem too, is trying to write that right now without having our recommendations and our implementation.
But maybe, but you know, we're gonna have to, as I understand it, all right, we may not be meeting monthly, but we're still gonna meet periodically afterwards. I think we're gonna have something to do in those meetings, so it could be one of the topics we propose to do in one of those meetings too. But
what you're going to be doing is working on your actions of your implementation plan
okay,
primarily.
okay,
And if this is one of them, this is an action to, hey, let's do a more comprehensive review of existing plans and make sure that our plan's in alignment, then so be it.
okay.
That's your action.
Okay.
Yeah, okay. All in favor of including this recommendation?
Are we sure we know what it means?
Well, if you don't know what it means, we should probably explain it. Do you know, are you not sure you know what it means? Looking at alignment between plans?
Well, then you throw in the national wild, scenic rivers, federally designated, and it's not just working with the other watersheds. The way I read it.
This is specific, this would be rivers designated within our watershed.
The way I would see it is we would, maybe, this is the way I see it. It perhaps would be a meeting following the report coming out, as we just discussed, but it would be a case of we would review the management plan of, say, the Middle Saluda and I guess the other ones down in Columbia.
Yeah, absolutely.
But would review the management plans at some point in time, would review the management plans of those two state scenic rivers, because there's no national wild in our watershed. And we would see how it compares to what we had in our report. And I guess it could be before or after it's issued, and then we would see if there's ideas that we want to update to our plan. That's to me how I would view us.
So I mean, basically all we're saying is we want to compare our plans to the other watersheds.
And see if there's contradictions that we need to address.
So again,
Or comments.
Or commonalities that we
then I may be missing something. I thought this was specific to plans within the Saluda River basin. That we were not comparing to other basins, but for.
That's why I named those two.
Yeah, so this is specific to plans affecting rivers in this basin.
Yes, the way it is written, though, the recommendation is that RBCs should assess alignment between their plan and other plans in their basin.
In their basin,
So the
yeah.
broad should look at all the different plans in their basin, the Saluda should look at theirs and should figure out where there's alignment, commonalities, or differences.
I don't understand.
If that helps, Thompson.
But in my mind, if we
The
put,
river basin plan in the management.
What
The
is
last
it?
line says between the river basin plan.
That's our
And the
plan.
management plan, what's the management?
And the management
The
plan
scenic
is
river.
just everything else. So it's either the state scenic river, and there's 2 of those in this basin, those plans, or it could be the watershed based plans, which there are several of them. You remember how
We
many?
should say
2 or
management
3?
plans,
2 in the Saluda.
and like corresponding management plans, maybe.
Plans.
You guys did some, we have Lake Greenwood and there, we have 2.
What?
You have 2 for this one?
Got the lower Saluda state,
lower
State
river, middle.
but there's no plan associated with that group. I sit on it.
You know.
The lower Saluda, there wasn't, but there was a plan that was written.
There's not a plan addressing flows.
Okay, well, then there's not a lot of commonalities, so that'd be an easy review.
Right. So,
Yeah,
just
okay,
tell you that right now.
okay. Okay,
Eddie can probably tell us the whole plan regarding.
okay, all right. Let me ask the easier question, because I think there's probably more people supporting this. Is anyone opposed to this recommendation? Online folks, anyone opposed to it?
This is just applying to the Saluda River Basin and its trips, right? It's not the broad or.
Right, as it applies to you, right, but your recommendation is a general recommendation that other RBC should do this as well. But you're not gonna have an action item in your implementation plan for telling other RBCs to do it.
Okay.
So a comment not opposed, but think it needs work rewriting for clarity.
Okay.
I second that.
That one.
We will try to wordsmith it so that it's not unambiguous. Okay.
So is
that
that
consensus,
consensus, so you can rewrite it first?
I'm gonna say consensus, but I'm gonna make it clearer. I think I can. All right, stream gauges. We had a rec about support continued efforts to maintain and expand stream flow gauges. We had some specific ones that were listed, that should be further considered during our implementation phase. We also have a recommendation, or part of this recommendation is that local governments that collect stream flow data make it more publicly accessible. Is there any other discussion we wanted to have around this recommendation?
Which trips are you looking at on the lower Saluda?
I don't remember who offered that one up.
Little River. Trying to think of some of the other ones. There's 3 or 4 I was thinking of. What's the tributary that City of Greenville discharges its wastewater effluent into?
And did you have a?
It's not Bush River, is it?
I don't think so. Bush River would be another one though.
Stoops Creek. So you talking about lower Saluda below the dam?
Yeah.
Or maybe even some of
Yeah.
the tributaries below Lake Greenwood, I might even ask. And I'm not saying I think there is one, I'm
Yeah.
listening for ideas from people who.
It's gotta be from Lake Greenwood. I don't know. The main trip below Lake Murray Dam is 12 Mile Creek and they already had a gauge.
I mean, the phrasing of this makes it such that we're not committing to a list that we want to stick
That's
our
correct.
line in the sand or whatever on.
I felt when this got added, there were upstate people who wanted some mid-country input on possibilities here.
I don't see anything wrong with this at all, just take out I mean, anytime a stream gauge can be put in, I don't see a problem with that, except for paying for it, other than that. Take care of a lot now.
Hey, John, just a quick question on it. Is A, B, C, D intended to be a priority list for ranking? Was it just-
No, I think it was just,
Right.
options that were thrown out by different.
That came up,
Yeah,
throughout
yeah.
the process.
And for a recommendation, I don't know that we even need the. I don't even know if we need that. The following water bodies have been suggested, because that would go into implementation, right?
I don't want to recreate it when we get to implementation.
Yeah, I think we did have a more general one, and then there was a suggestion, well, let's list off some possible options as part of the recommendations, and we're a little more specific about that. So I think that's why.
In the way we adjusted that one before, where Catherine was looking at the 3 bullets, the 3 bullets went out and went into
Yeah.
implementation. Maybe that middle section comes out and it gets saved from implementation, so you have support continued efforts to maintain and expand stream flow gauges. Recommend that local governments that collect stream flow data make it more publicly accessible, and that is the recommendation.
We can do it that way.
I'm okay with that.
I like that.
But I don't want us to delete this and have to redo it. I want us to,
Yeah.
Save that for.
we need to save it so we have it when we get to the implementation.
Robert, Julie chimed in and said Wilson is right below Buzzard's Roost. Is that one?
That may be one, but again, we don't need to spend
Okay.
time going into specific streams or reaches.
Well, there is a gauge on Wilson Creek.
Maybe she's saying that's where a gauge is. It just says Wilson is right below Buzzard's Roost. So.
Okay. We vote on, we voted on this, here it's just gonna, I asked, for anybody opposed? That's nice. Not yet, okay. Anyone opposed to the recommendation as highlighted here, 2 sentences?
All the gauges.
And online, anyone opposed?
Nobody can just go to this page.
Okay.
Comments.
Got consensus on that one.
There's more gauges.
Data acquisition. Data usage and acquisition. Compile the data obtained from established credible systems in alignment with RBC goals for utilization across the state before creating new systems, databases, and monitoring stations. Stored data and new data when developed needs to be publicly accessible in a consistent standardized format, one that supports public comprehension. This one, I think, originally came out of the Upper Savannah RBC and the Savannah River Keeper, but the discussion that we had in the previous meetings is that we generally liked it, and there was thought about maybe adding this to the building RBC technical capacity recommendation, which was already approved. We can handle it any way you want. Any thoughts?
This is nitpicky, but can we just change the word utilization to use? Like, that's such a word.
Yeah.
For use, it just should be for use.
Anyway.
Second line,
For use.
All right.
just should be use.
What's in alignment with the RBC goals? Is that the data or the established credible systems?
Well, your goals were something that you developed, meeting number 3. We'd have to go back and review those.
I'm just saying the way the sentence reads, it says compile the data obtained from established credible systems in alignment with RBC goals. Which one of those is in alignment with RBC goals? Both of them, one of them, the data or the credible system?
I think alignment with RBC goals is speaking to the actual data, meaning that you're collecting data that supports your goals. That's the way I read it.
Why would you collect anything else?
That's right.
Good point. I mean,
So do we have the,
maybe we don't even need that.
do we have the building RBC technical capacity recommendation? You got the note, we could work that in there.
Yeah.
I was wondering if we should take a look at doing that.
That is, DES should create and maintain an online library of or a catalog of links to technical information to enhance everybody's understanding of water resources, concepts, and issues.
Think I like maybe copy pasting some portion of this up there.
I think it belongs there rather than.
I'm not sure it's a separate point. Maybe if we want to lengthen the first one.
So to me, those are two very different sentences. The first one doesn't require DES to necessarily to construct any new databases.
Right.
The second one seems to require DES to construct new databases with the word compile. I have a challenge with that second sentence, one from compiling, because that is putting a burden on DES to take existing data and recompile it into a new format. I have a challenge with the word credible. Who is to decide what is and is not credible? There are some people who would say Kokoros is not credible because it is volunteer. The adopt stream is not credible because it doesn't use necessarily appropriate sampling and collected methods.
What if we delete?
So I would delete that second sentence altogether.
I agree.
I don't think it adds anything to the recommendation.
And then I think
delete that sentence.
Yes. And the sentence starting with historic, I think flows better from the first one.
The discussion you presented on was mostly centered around making sure that data is publicly accessible. So that was their main point of that recommendation.
Data are we talking about exactly?
The Riverkeeper, Savannah Riverkeeper had some specifics in mind, and I don't recall what they were. So I guess it's up to each individual's interpretation. I can't speak to any specific pieces of data right now that is not necessarily publicly accessible, but Tanya has had problems, I guess, in the past getting data that should be publicly accessible, and I don't know what it was.
And if I'm remembering our discussion on this, it may just be a page with links to other sites. As I recall, we had some discussion about how do I know what the data is available?
Yeah, it was kind of a clearinghouse.
So it was, yes, yeah, that's kind of what I saw it as being.
Right.
Was kind of a clearinghouse linking you to other data and helping you, helping the public.
Yeah.
Comprehend it.
Right. I think there was discussion that that type of approach would be useful.
Yeah.
And I agree with Rob, but when we put this up here, the compile sentence seemed more problematic.
You know, compile and just maintain a list of links is certainly different.
I mean, again, I would point to the watershed outlets. There's a tremendous amount of data there. That's nice layered systems. I mean, maybe we're talking about other data on top of that.
Yeah, there's discussion about like notice of violations. Could that be put up on the watershed atlas? Things like that you know should be publicly accessible or maybe is, but it's not promoted and made available on the watershed atlas.
I know there's doctoral theses and dissertations that people should have access to them. It'd be nice to have a clearinghouse,
Like a lot.
not necessarily just hard data from a regulatory agency.
Okay, gotcha.
That's how I've always looked at it.
Well, correct me if I'm wrong, but the watershed atlas shows you the spatial information on a lot of different things, like maybe where water patrol is, or maybe where monitor set is, but it doesn't get you to any of the actual data behind it, right?
You can drill down on some of it and get to it, but if you don't know anything about GIS, it's gonna take you a while to figure it out. And you're gonna stub your toe along the way.
But like the withdrawal data, you can't link to a surface water permit, say, oh, this is the amount of water they're pulling out.
It shows the permitted volume,
They
but
won't show you what they're actually using.
historical water use is not immediately available.
So it's good information, but I don't like to think of, I mean, it does have some data, but people make it sound like it has a lot more data than it actually has.
Yeah, it's,
Yeah,
No.
just make sure there wasn't a misperception.
Yeah.
Perception about that.
That's why I asked, what data are we talking about?
Don't know that we named specific data. I thought the reference typically came,
but again, to me, that gets into the mitigation or the implementation. Where we can,
and I think the discussion, well, how do I know what data is available? I think it comes back to that, and that's why. So what data are we talking about? We don't know what data is available. That's what we're talking about.
Yeah.
And so I think that takes us back to, I think, John, you put it well when you said kind of a clearinghouse.
Right.
And perhaps it's a little bit poorly defined and leaves a lot to interpretation, but that may be what we're asking for here. You know, it is giving some interpretation.
You want to
do it.
Who's going to do it?
Yeah.
DES, that's what we
No,
said.
it's a sign.
Oh,
And that's why putting it here, it kind of more clearly linked to SCDES in the first sentence, but as far as responsibility goes, I think it's kind of asking SCDES to have a clearinghouse for.
that doesn't mean that the RBC could help support DES. So you all could say, hey, there's a great report that so-and-so did in the upper part of the watershed that should be on this link, this clearinghouse page. You send them the link and they post it. I mean, that's how you can make it really easy for them.
And then they kind of hopefully take ownership of
Keeping it up to date.
keeping it up to date, or if it disappears, then it gets removed,
Right.
you know, which I don't think we're gonna do a good job.
Right. And I think that's the only way it's gonna really happen. I mean, this is not really a core responsibility of DES, but with support from the RBC, I'm sure they would, at least post the link.
Well, the landing page already exists on DS's website, so
Exactly.
we don't have to like make a new website.
Yeah,
That
yeah.
makes sense.
As part of the action, we probably have to specify that, RBC will need to support DES in this effort, provide suggested links to include on the web page, and they'll just basically do the HTML part of it.
Or like upload PDF to the back end and link.
Yeah.
Yeah, if it's an old document too.
Yeah, yeah.
Like just some of the stuff that we can't find anywhere, right?
Like it's literally watershed consortium reports.
Yeah, all that, like that should be there, to make it easy.
It used to be on, we used to host it, we took over hosting of it, it's a long story, I have them all on thumb drive, and somebody's gotta rebuild the site for me.
Or just, but we can just get it on the rest of the site and then it's there for the public.
There are
Yeah.
some accessibility
Yeah.
issues, with just scanned old copies, the readers won't work on them and stuff. There's a law around that for agencies.
Oh, really?
I don't know how close to y'all.
Get involved in some of this.
Yeah, we'd have to look at what specific data you're wanting us to post and take it data by data specific, and I think this, for me, this seems like something that could come up in meetings in the future. Maybe we could bring some folks to speak specifically to it. If you had specific data needs and you had trouble finding them, we could have a discussion on it.
Okay,
I mean, if it's reports and stuff, you gotta get permission from the author in order to do that. Not run into problems. So if it's a paper or something that was done and it was published, you have to contact the senior author on that to get permission to use it.
Well, that, or you have to, a lot of published research is behind paywalls. And so, yes, you can purchase the article from the journal and use it and cite it, but it's behind the paywall. So, but that still means at least there's an abstract that's available that you can review the abstract, and if it's something that's got merit, you then figure out a way to get it.
Yeah.
Legally.
okay, we've exceeded our discussion.
Exactly.
Anyone opposed to this revised building RBC technical capacity recommendation as written?
So I would like to make one editorial suggestion on the third line: historic data and new data when discovered need.
You want discovered instead of developed, or
Need.
you just want to get rid of need?
Just get, yes, thank you, because it's.
Yeah, okay. Anyone opposed? All right. Thanks for that one. Okay, this one's going away. Okay, evaluating the impacts of changing land use. We had the Saluda RBC, the support from technical experts should evaluate land use changes on water resources, quantity and quality. Method for this is land prioritization analysis that will provide land uses such as rural and working agricultural lands, biological diversity, and future environmental health. So Rebecca offered to wordsmith this one and offered up this version of it. We did generally approve the recommendation at the last meeting, but Rebecca promised to wordsmith it, and that's what you're looking at here. I will say the broad RBC had a very similar recommendation about looking at changes to land use and doing land prioritization analysis. And Michelle Eddy of RTI is going to be presenting on that at tomorrow's broad RBC meeting. So that's one of the implementation actions that they're already taking based on their similar recommendation. So any discussion on this? Go ahead.
Oh, sure. Yeah, just a little bit of context on this. So we talked about this at length in the last meeting. And what you're seeing in the second sentence is how we actually defined land prioritization analysis in our critical lands map. So we look at rural and agricultural lands, biodiversity, and future environmental health. So that's how we actually categorize the use of our land prioritization. Obviously up for discussion, that's just kind of what I operated based off of the conversation we had interest in upstate Frederick's lands map. But that's where that verbiage came from.
And inherent in future environmental health is protection of critical water supply areas, right?
Yeah. And that could be more specific.
Thoughts?
I like it, but I also want the recommendation that we talked about, and forgive me if it's somewhere else, I just missed it from our review, but trying to help economic developers determine where growth should go based on water availability, because it's both sides, right? We not only do we want to be protecting land that should be protected, but then making sure we're providing information that makes it easier for economic development projects to locate. Do we have that? So it would be good to see those side by side if we don't. Or if we do, sorry.
You go back to the last one. So I didn't have a list because in the Word document I circulated, I just put the green bucket ones that we approved at the last meeting. There was other previous ones that we had approved.
I can try to find it too, John, if you want to keep going.
Yeah, I don't think it was even part of the last slide set.
We did talk, that was like one of the first recommendations I think we came up with, meeting 5.
Yeah, no, I think we do have it. It's just, it hasn't been in my slide set recently, so I didn't include it.
I can look.
All right. Okay.
So a good point Kaylee just made, I just want to say this real quick, is maybe the term future environmental health is a little ambiguous. What do people think? Is that too ambiguous? Should we define that better or differently?
Yeah, is it ecological or is it?
Yeah, I'm looking at the document now to see what we say.
Yeah. That's a good question.
It's about creating connectivity between conservation keystones. There's a lot of really nice conservation verbiage in here, but it's not super definitive.
So
yeah, so I agree. I think we could make it more definitive, especially as it relates to the RBC. I think we should.
So I'm reading, I know what you said on the second sentence, but somebody who would just read that second sentence thinks the RBC is going to set the prioritization for the land such as rural agriculture. I mean, that would be the only heartburn I have, is that I didn't think we're an advisory, and that says that we will prioritize land. And I don't know whether that's our function or not.
Well, I think if you're taking that sentence out of context, that could be inferred, but I think the first thing that it says is that we need to evaluate land use changes, and a method for it is prioritization analysis. So we could be more specific on what kind of prioritization analysis we're gonna do. I just based it off of conversation we had about interest in upstate forever's prioritization analysis. So we can change that, obviously, because this is a recommendation, that we can orient a little bit more specifically to what we won't have heartburn. Yeah.
Can I? So it says we should evaluate land use changes. Are we saying we are going to conduct a study to do this for the whole basin, or what is stimulating our evaluation? Because we don't have a mechanism to do that. So I mean, unless we all want to pony up a certain amount of money, that is not, I don't understand. I'm not saying that this is not absolutely something to be done. I don't know how it gets done.
You're more like we can recommend somebody do it.
Yeah, that was one of the reasons why the broad didn't go this far and say they should do this. They said, let's learn more about it. Let's invite Michelle in to tell us about it, and we're going to hear from Erica Paulus too about the work that Katie's primarily done. So we're going to see two different land prioritization.
So this
approaches.
might be have counties come to us with their from their planning groups and share what their.
Or we
changes they
advocate all the
see.
counties do this in their plans.
I mean, Catherine, how do you evaluate land use change? I know this is your.
Yeah, I mean, I don't love that because you'll get a lot of different strategies and approaches that are not. Like, don't necessarily cover a whole watershed or take it all into account. Like, I do think it needs to be watershed done. I mean, there's different ways to do it, right? The more information you have available to you, whether it's if the county is fully zoned or not, if their future land use map was a box they chose to check, right? Or if they actually put some thought into that future land use map, because I would argue there's not always the case.
And government and elected officials change.
Right.
So that never lasts.
Right, I mean, it would be awesome to do this, have it GIS based. Pull the data, and so we could constantly be updating it, and it's an iterative process rather than a stagnant map, because it can't be, it won't work. Because things will change, right, like. I'll use scout voters because it's outside of our area, but scout voters deciding to set up shop in northern Michigan County is like a big, game changer. To that area and water use and people moving in, like, I mean, there's no water and sewer available in that area, and now South Carolina Water Utilities, which is a private water utility, is thinking about running lines all over the whole thing to prepare for the growth that's coming, right? So if we can have a baseline understanding of our land use and then be able to help like do some predictability into the future of where, wow, like this portion of the basin, we're already low on water, we're gonna be extra low on water, if more stuff is allowed to go there, like maybe that's where we should be thinking about conserving, and that's where you get upstate forever and the South Carolina Conservation being involved of like protecting some of that land versus, wow, this area, we got some water, we know we want some more industry, let's work with Upstate Alliance, for example, who covers the top 10 counties in the state, and say, hey, this is where, when you're recruiting, we got some water availability here. Like, I think doing a land use analysis to think about all the layers of where we want land use to go is a really good exercise, but I will stand by that.
No, I mean,
But is
could
it
we reorient, well, can I propose rewording this to be that we would support technical experts to evaluate land use changes?
Yeah.
Can we vibe with that?
Yes.
We can't personally do it, but it
No,
should
but
be
we
based
would
in
support,
done, not
yeah,
separated into a bunch of little.
But who should do
technical experts.
I mean, DES. DES should put out an RFQ, there should be funding dedicated to this kind of work. I would love.
Look, I mean, But what I'm sitting here thinking, you talk about counties, and I understand what you say when you suggest a county do something. They're gonna come up with all kinds of different ways to do it in different counties. But at the same time, they are the ones that are making the decisions about land use and expansion and all that. So why wouldn't we want to ask them to evaluate the land use changes and the impact of land use changes on water, quantity, and quality?
Because it's a political boundary and not a watershed boundary, so it doesn't make sense to do it that way.
But they're the ones making the decision.
Oh, for sure.
And Pickens County comes to Anderson County's gonna make that decision.
Right?
Yeah, I think Thompson's got a good point that we should encourage counties to undertake this, or countywide organizations, councils of government, COGS, upstate COGS.
Careful,
I mean,
it's, if you're in a county, and most of us have been, where, controlling growth is becoming a political tennis ball. You've got, in Lexington County, there's been some recent changes in overlay districts and density and things like that, and, one of the mechanisms recently used was to require multi-agency review of proposed projects, which in theory sounds wonderful unless it's being used as leverage to deny a project. And what you don't want to do is for the Basin Council to be in the middle of, well, we didn't hear from the Basin Council, so the project's off. So just a thought of, because we've been in the middle of recently.
Ben, not to put you on the spot, but
Yeah.
you were involved in the Catawba Waterees
Correct.
land prioritization study. So that was a study that Catawba Wateree Water Management Group funded. And their funding comes from their members, basically Charlotte Water, Duke, others. They paid RTI and maybe others to do a similar land prioritization study.
Yep.
Has that study been communicated to local governments that have control over land development, land use?
We're working on it. A lot of that tool has been used to guide prioritization of conservation practices by the Catawba. They have a little bit of a different structure. They have a lot more money, I believe, than this group does.
They have money.
Our budget is over there. And so they really dialed in on using that tool for their source water protection, kind of trying to figure out, all right, where do we want to make investments to prevent development in the future? The challenge from a modeling perspective of trying to understand where these land use changes are going to occur is, yeah, it's predicting the future of these incredibly large areas. So I think what Catherine was saying of lining up with future land use maps and zoning, rather than relying on sort of more hand-wavy projections of economics and climate change, where people are going to be going as a result of that. Identifying where those opportunities exist, rather than relying on a feedback loop with the dynamic modeling necessarily. I think even just identifying those opportunities through prioritization up front can really do a lot of the work for you there. And then you can use that to then guide it and say, all right, well, where does it make sense within these sites that we've identified? Where can we get the most bang for our buck from there, from an engineering perspective, from a project perspective? So I think you guys are on the right track here. It's just a question of, yeah, where do you want that decision making to lie, and how do you want the anticipated changes to be modeled and represented?
Also, the sophistication that it can be will vary drastically by county if it's at the county level based on their funding capabilities. Oregon County is doing this right now. They have money, they're one of the fastest growing places in the country. And they've done a whole predictability land use analysis of what their housing could look like in the future. And it's literally used by their council to help inform decision making, and it's very cool. I just saw a presentation on it. They actually are going to present it nationally because it's so unique and new. But you know, we can't expect some of our counties that have less money or maybe have a single GIS person to rise to the level that we would like to see this baseline assessment completed, which is why I would advocate for a big watershed.
When you're talking about the assessment, what we're talking about is somebody taking into consideration what development's going to do to the quantity and quality. I mean, you're talking about just, you know, broad-based, you know, what's the impact on this watershed. But I mean, if if that information is not utilized at some point, it's useless.
Sure, yeah, right, we would be performing it in the hopes that it actually gets.
Gets used.
But I don't think anybody's gonna do it outside of us. I mean, I could see a cog maybe, but. I'll call Chip Bentley out today and ask him if he'd do it.
Rebecca, the land prioritization that you've already done with Furman, others, that's just based on existing land use where you get the most bang for your buck for
Yeah,
conservation.
yeah.
Doesn't factor in future or changing land use or.
So it's a great question, and I'm sure you guys will hear a little bit about it at the broad tomorrow, so forgive me for a very basic understanding and interpretation of this, but it's something that kind of came to our frame of mind when we talked about this recommendation in Upstate Forever for this RBC, was that like even our critical lands map technically might be getting a little outdated because it was created in 2016, 2017, so I think what you're saying, that you're asking is like, does it evaluate the changing land use?
Yeah.
And I don't think it does it as well, because it's kind of based on growing more archaic data. And that's where what Catherine was saying is really important, is we need to have something that can be updated more quickly, because obviously there's development happening everywhere all the time. And if we're the longer, like a map like this, or prioritization analysis like this that sits on a shelf and isn't updated, it becomes less useful. In terms of like how we utilize it for our watershed-based plans is more so based on criteria and to direct outreach. So it's most of the time we're working out like a hub 10 level scale, so they're really large watersheds, and it's hard to direct outreach efforts to landowners. So what we utilize that prioritization analysis for is first and foremost trying to target our funding to what we deem as the highest priority parcels. Obviously, that's not the end all be all for funding. There's a lot of that, and like investigation and inspection that has to go into that, and also landowner participation, but that's a long-winded explanation of how we utilize it and my reservation with it. I think that this is a really valuable recommendation, but I do think we need to make it more specific to how land prioritization analysis will impact water quality and quantity and quality. Sorry, I got to put this in order. And I had specific things in there, like land uses such as rural and agricultural lands and biological diversity, but we don't have to be that specific, It could just be that a method for this is land prioritization analysis that will prioritize land uses that most closely impact water quantity and quality. If we like that better, we can look at that. A lot of this comes down to funding mechanisms that become available during implementation. So again, we are getting into our habit of where we're getting a little ahead of ourselves. Are we talking about actions? Or are we talking about a recommendation?
Yeah, for now, we're just talking about the recommendation.
No, that's what I'm saying.
Yeah,
But yeah.
To me, when I think about recommendation, though, it does get back to who's going to own it, who's going to fund it, who the stakeholder is. It's not clear to me we have a water basin stakeholder other than the people the people in the water basin, which kind of to me puts it more back at the county level for better despite the worst.
Right.
Despite the worst.
That's more elegant way of saying what I was saying earlier around Catawba. They've got a pot of money specifically for source water.
They've got an entity that can fund it and maintain it. It's not a, you get a grant, someone comes and does it once.
Right. They have a mechanism.
I don't see the mechanism for our watershed.
Yeah, that's kind of the problem. I mean, there's
Which
not like a mechanism unless somebody kicks in money.
Despite all the flaws I heard with the county is owning it, I don't see someone better.
Yeah.
Well, I'm just saying, a lot of times counties just make random decisions. Sometimes there's doesn't seem to be any logic behind it. Sometimes.
And in 2 years, it'll be a new county council and they'll all change again. I agree exactly with that. It's got a lot of flaws.
But as an example, recently in Aiken County, not in this river basin, but they Columbia Farm went to them. They wanted to relocate their poultry processing facility out of West Columbia down to Aiken County. Well, they turned it down on the excuse that it was gonna use too much water. But then they turned around a month or two later and approved it, done the process, and said they're just gonna use lots more water and produce no jobs. So I'm just talking about just random considerations that the county councils can make. But they're the ones that ultimately make the decision.
Well, isn't if this is a recommendation that is then put into a state water plan, couldn't it then get funding from the state to implement it?
Yeah, I mean, generally, that's one reason why you want to have recommendations here is.
Yeah.
Encourage funding, so if all the other RBCs have a similar recommendation and it gets into the state plan, it'd probably be more likely to get funded. People see it as a priority. So,
And other states do it different ways, you know.
So
there's
do we need?
Watershed management areas in Georgia and Texas.
Yeah.
Well, I guess I'm
Florida
trying to say, just because there isn't a
get
funding
funded.
mechanism directly identified, should it?
Well, that
does
makes the question, do
negate
we
it?
bump it down a bullet?
Again?
We bump it down and include it in the bullet below.
well, I would encourage you not to just demote it because there's not an identified funding.
No, I guess that's what I thought.
Well, I was adding it to the RBC supports adequate state funding for.
Oh, yeah, you could put it in there, I mean.
Since we seem to be talking a lot about who should fund it, is the next one seemed to be. As soon as we said the state, that's what drew me to the next one was. Not to demote it to a sub bullet, but it seemed like a big of the problem was who owned it, and that next bullet was is a solution. I don't say it has to be our solution.
Well, if you put it there, then it's just suggesting the state fund it, you know, there's other ways potentially to fund it, like the Catawba Water E is an example where they've got primarily large water suppliers kicking into a pot to do
Okay.
Studies that are collectively good for the whole basin. I mean, yeah, Robert.
So let me ask this question about this recommendation. Because I'm sitting on the fence for it. A method for this is land prioritization analysis. To me, that suggests we are sort of leaving a door open to an analytical, to someone selecting any analytical process. Is there merit in saying that that is the method we recommend, land prioritization analysis, which I, as I understand from Rebecca's presentation, is a specific approach toward accomplishing this?
I mean, we could even say a GIS based land use analysis, and if you want to get a tad more broader while still being specific. If you're like, because if you're worried about that specific one.
So I am suggesting that if we are making a recommendation that I have a little concern over the first sentence and the second sentence, because I'm a little confused as to, are we recommending land prioritization analysis as the method, or are we simply saying this is a method? And I'm sort of saying, I'm wondering whether we should be specific, saying we want to suggest land prioritization analysis as the method we recommend. Or
Is it
are
the
we
same
going to leave
thing,
it
or is it
forward? And I don't know enough about how this is done to make a reasoned answer to that question.
Right, so
Was the italicized words, land prioritization analysis, specific to the method that Upstate Forever has used along with Furman?
Yeah,
Or you need it to
so
be general?
the way that we all characterized all of it was the upstate critical lands map. So I guess in the methodology for it that we refer to it as is land prioritization analysis. I almost feel like I need a little bit more information from our members at Upstate Forever that actually did this analysis for the critical lands map. If we're like trying to categorize it or label it more specifically than this, because this is what I have. Yeah.
Okay.
I also don't think that, correct me if I'm wrong, I don't think that's a proprietary thing, right?
Mhm.
So we could get rid of the italics, broaden it to be a GIS based land use analysis. Saying the same thing without having it maybe cause confusion about it being a specific
What is,
singular.
what does Greenville, who already protected all their lands, have to say about this?
There's only one word, I mean, the second sentence, once you get it worked out, the first sentence still has that one word that I always object to, because that's not part of the scope, and that's quality. So, I mean, we're a quantity group, and I don't. I mean, I would object to and quality in that first sentence if you can work out that second sentence for everybody else. That's. But yes, ours is protected.
Okay, I think others on the RBC would say quality is on the table in subsequent phases of planning, so they would probably argue to leave it in, right? Yeah.
Yes.
Can I just play devil's advocate with you?
Of course.
Jeff, y'all are absolutely concerned about water quality in your shed and how changing land use would impact that.
There's no changing land use.
That's why you're concerned. So just at the last commission meeting, we all had a conversation.
To make sure.
You're not supposed to bring up my commission.
Where y'all talked about landslides due to bad weather and how that's gonna impact the water quality. So granted, that's not human.
Remember, my point is if you let it in. At any point, it then grows, and that's one of the things that. Would you object to? You know that I like water quality and I want to protect the quality, but the point is that that's not what I thought I was told. We were not appointed to do, and I was specifically told not to allow quality. To infiltrate this group, and it is a quantity issue only to me. Although, again, everybody here, I love water quality. It's just, I just don't want it to sneak in.
Just quantity.
In the statewide plan, though, it's our discretion to decide to the point to which we invite quality into the conversation. And I would not recommend spending money doing this with only quantity in mind, when you can spend money once and attack both beasts at the same time. That's more
You haven't even figured out
economical.
who's gonna pay for it yet.
Yeah, fine, we can figure that out later, but like, I would not recommend that this full analysis gets done without quality in
So-
mind. It's a layer you can add in.
You're not gonna change my mind, but I understand your point.
Sedimentation is a good example that crosses over between
It's
quality and
both.
quantity.
We already had this discussion, I thought we decided that we were gonna, quality was gonna be the future.
Yeah,
Yeah, we do have a discussion, or we have a recommendation about opening it up to do potentially quality in the future, if the RBCs continue on. We're spending more time on this last, so this is an important one. I don't want to shortchange this one, but I do want to talk a little bit about policy, regulatory, and legislative.
I was online.
What we might do is yellow bucket this one, and move on. I hate to kick the can, because when we come back to it, we're gonna probably have the same exact conversation we just had.
Yeah, well, the next one too, because we can have the same conversation.
well,
I like Jeff's suggestion.
Well, so,
the GIS based.
JS base, take off the italicized and.
I can take a quick stab at that, John. Wait,
Support the
But as y'all think about this for the next discussion on it. What you're asking, or to me, what that sentence says, that first sentence says, is we want somebody to develop this data. We want to determine what it is. What I'm proposing is we want somebody in the decision-making process to take that into consideration before they approve developments. So we'll save that for the next discussion.
Yeah, I think
But that's the.
that discussion may be in this next round where we talk about policies and things that we're supporting. But yeah, you're absolutely right, that we want to make sure that once these tools are out there, they use them.
Keyboard fell asleep there for a second, so I'm gonna just back up. Okay. We're gonna come back to this one, and I think we'll come back to this one as well too, because I want to at least start the discussion about policy, legislative, regulatory recommendations. Melanie circulated some recommendations that she's been working on. So those are those first three, and they kind of all go together, and the justification and background for her recommendations were included in the documents that I circulated prior to the meeting. So we've got some specific recommendations from Melanie, and then we've got some more general recommendations adopted by the broad and the PD. And at last week's Upper Savannah meeting, we also adopted a similar recommendation. For example, this one here, the broad PD and Upper Savannah were all generally in agreement. However, the Upper Savannah tweaked it a little bit. Trying to decide how best to start these. We could start with the specific recommendations that Melanie's got and talk about those, or we could start from a bigger picture. But I think let's just start at the top and talk a little bit about Melanie's.
And I think my first one captures, like, scroll down to the, allow for reasonable use, that is, captured in that first recommendation.
Yeah, so the reasonable use idea is one that pretty much all the other RBCs that have discussed this have supported it. Even the EDISO discussed it, and they supported it by a strong majority, but it wasn't consensus. Your first one here is require permits statewide for all existing and new water withdrawals over 3 million gallons per month, including those before 2011. Well, this is more than just reasonable use.
It is, but I'm saying that it's captured in I'll use the second sentence capturing the reasonable use.
Yeah, let's talk about that. That's the easier one first.
I just want to make it very clear that our recommendation is those three in concert. It's not an all cart. So for that to work, all three both go together. And these didn't just come out of the air. These are, the first one, for example, is came from the PPAC, where there was, my understanding is there was some general consensus around that. And the others are ones that are collective, not just from our organization, but our collective river organizations through South Carolina Rivers Forever have been working on and advocating for these since coming on 10 years now. So
Okay, so Melanie's proposing these as a package. I guess maybe start the discussion with, are there RBC members that are opposed to all three of these as a package? Casey down here. Okay, I kind of figured that. Casey, what about the package are you not comfortable with?
Some of the wording in here is very reminiscent to some of the wording that's in the law and regulations that's ambiguous. It's qualitative more than quantitative. So I think things get lost in the interpretation, usually not beneficial. Reasonableness is a tough one.
Is reasonableness the definition as like for the riparian doctrine, which is what we are for riparian state? Is that what that word is supposed to represent?
Sure. I know it's part of the riparian doctrine, but so we
Which
are,
sucks.
to your point.
It's
Yeah,
already vague.
it's
We
super
have a vague thing to go off of, which is out of our control, right?
Brett said he agrees.
Who was that? Oh, right. Yeah, with Casey. Yeah. Okay.
So can you put up the bullet points that go behind all of these, the rationale? Or has everybody had a chance to read those?
Yeah, I don't, let me see, do I bring those over?
So the first one, really the essence of it is, all surface water use or withdrawals would then, whether it's an existing grandfather, which are not subject to any kind of minimum flow, or a future or a registered, everyone would be held to the same standard. And subject to minimum midstream flows.
So that first bullet, when you're suggesting all should be held to the same standard, you're talking both about registrations and permits, not distinguishing by water use type. And you're also talking about grandfathered versus new permits and registrations. Both those
Everyone would
things.
come under a permit.
Yeah, everyone would be under a permit and there would be no distinction between type of use.
The current permit holders will be re-permitted.
That's basically what this is suggesting too. They'd all be held to the same standard, which would require that they be re-permitted or re-registered. But there would be no registration, so it would be re-permitted.
The permits are forever.
No,
There's a duration,
correct, which is
20 to 40 years, I think is how it's worded.
20 to 40 years.
Yeah.
Okay.
yes.
And just keep in mind our model that we just went through, putting all of the permits and registrations to their maxing them out. We're allocated. If we do nothing, we're on the road to eradication, assuming those, to get to those plans.
Right.
It's kind of help safeguard against that.
Yeah.
How do people feel about the first sentence? Can we talk about the first sentence?
About this one?
No,
First bullet?
in the recommendation.
Oh,
Adjusted.
what was that, Tom?
It'll be adjusted.
Be against it, yeah. And you would be against it, not necessarily for the grandfather part, but more for agriculture. You want to keep registrations, is that correct?
Yeah, well, I mean, I'm here representing agriculture, and of course, agriculture are the only registered users, you know, we come under a different category than permitted users. Now, I will admit up front, is the registered use, is it a perfect system? No, it's not. And we can sit here and we can discuss that and might need some tweaking here, there and yonder, and we can talk about an opinion, you know, that we have, that it could be corrected, just regulatory, rather than changing the law. But you start changing but anyway, I don't know that all of them need to be redone.
In the Edisto, so a couple of things, so groundwater registrations. Well, in the coastal plain, you have to get a groundwater permit because the whole area now is a capacity use area.
Right.
Surface water is different. You can still get registrations. However, in the Edisto, that state field's been used up, so now they have to apply for permits. Some parts of the PD, it's been that way.
And that's the problem. Of course, the Edisto was the poster child of what's wrong.
Yeah.
And of course, most people are familiar with it, that you just have people out there that just want to apply for registrations that never intended to use the water and are not using the water.
Right, so
And
what I'm getting at is
This would be beneficial.
that trend should
But-
continue throughout the state so that then by
But it's
default.
our opinion, Farm Bureau's opinion, and our legal opinion that DES could go in there and look. They're reporting it every year, whether they're using it or not, and they could reduce.
No. They've already threatened Greenville Water with that.
Well-
They'll do that to Greenville Water too, so.
No, I'm talking about registered users, just registered users.
You let them say, I mean, we've got a plant that we don't pump 150 million gallons per day at, and it has been mentioned before. That they want to reduce that permit, and we don't have to give that permit up to that pipe. Because we will be pumping 150 million gallons per day by 2050, and we're not gonna give up the permit, so. That you let them do that here, then they'll move over to that.
But it was our understanding, and I'm talking about Farm Bureau, when this legislation was originally passed, that the registered users would be registered at their pumping capacity. These folks that applied for these had no pumping capacity. No. But yet they were granted these registrations for outrageous amounts of water that they never intended to use.
So I see your point. I think that's unfortunately outside this RBC's control, how DES can operate.
Well, I'm just explaining.
Right.
If you open that back up, then it really becomes complicated. We understand it's a problem. But when you open the law back up, then that opens everything back up to consideration.
Yeah. One other thing, Thompson and representing the Farm Bureau still thinks there's registrations and permits should be separate. What do others think about having all with water withdrawals for surface water held to the same standard? So eliminating registrations and permits and that distinction.
This might be a silly question, but can you explain why you want them to be separate? Registrations and permits?
Well, there was just different standards and different requirements for a registered user versus a permitted user. We didn't have to go in and do all the paperwork and do all the explanations and all that. You know, based on the historical theory of riparian rights, you know, prior to all of this laws, we were operating under the old English riparian law that ran through our property. We had the right to use it as long as it didn't harm anybody downstream. So under that understanding of how agriculture had always used water, then this kind of furthered that, but with a formal process that established a right or an intent to actually use that property and a reporting requirement of what we were actually using, say the broader good could obtain that data to know what kind of pumping we were doing, and then pointed out some of the others. Some of our earlier discussions, a lot of these are on tributaries. They're not on the mainstream of the Saluda, with very limited water supplies that are often enhanced or augmented with on-farm storage, lakes and ponds and things. So it's kind of a mixed bag. And of course, those ponds are not regulated. We can pump all the water we want to out of that pond. It's not regulated, but what we're pumping out of a flowing surface water is registered, or it's known.
How would Farm Bureau members react if, say, all registrations were converted to a 20-year permit after which they'd have to renew?
Well, there again is the technical aspects of what we would be required to do to maintain that permit. Right now, if we're registered, we just have it. Unless they can see a reason to reduce it. And I know there have been some out there that are reduced. And I'm not sure exactly. Well, some of them are voluntary. And some of them, you know.
Any in our basin?
In our basin? I don't think so.
I mean, we looked at the water supply earlier, so I was suspecting not.
No, I don't think there's any in our basin. It would be, it'd be down very lower end, around the action things in there, but I don't think any of them have been reduced in our basin. Go ahead and do.
The problem is that the registered users are not subject to minimum in-stream flow requirements whatsoever. And yeah, and they can take all the way up to the safe yield. If you have a number of them you want to piece together, and they can take all the way up to the safe yield. And the safe yield as defined in our law is different from how it is defined in the regulation. And the regulation is against the law. And the regulation says that you can take 80% of mean annual daily flow, so which is not available in our rivers statewide for over half the time. So it, in effect, authorizes those agricultural users to be able to drain our rivers dry over half of the time. And so it grants those users those supreme rights to drain our rivers dry.
And it also deprives the downstream if it happens, it'll deprive the downstream agricultural user as well. So the agriculture. It's impactful to agriculture as well as others.
Right.
Y'all do understand that in agriculture, the only time we need water is when we're short.
Right.
You know,
It's August.
water is when we're in the worst drought. And so, you know, as a natural occurrence, we're going to be wanting to pump when the streams have the least ability to provide us water. And that's just the nature of the beast. I mean, if it's raining every day, we're not pumping water.
Well, we saw what happened with Walter Farms. We saw what happened with Walter Farms coming in and basically proposing to take nearly all of the South Fork of the Ester. We saw what
happened with Walter Farms.
Excuse me?
What happened with Walter Farms?
Well, thanks to pushback, they reduced. They reduced and they didn't.
They did voluntarily. They started digging wells and pumping Groundwater, huh?
But
Maybe that's
there-
better, I don't know.
They're, well,
Okay,
If they were upstream of you though, how would you feel about it?
Look, we were having this discussion earlier and although it's not in the law, what I have found over the years is there's so few agricultural users out there that the impact of one to the other is very minimal, and there's usually cooperation between the two if there is an impact happening. So that it's not like, I mean, I know of no disputes, no wars in the state over two agricultural users wanting the same water and, and it going to court or other than that. I'm talking about legitimate agricultural users, not these that are registered on the Edisto and not use the water.
So you're telling me that two farmers in a crisis, they would rather work it out themselves than have this system tell them how to work it out?
Absolutely.
Okay.
I will say Walter Farms too did agree as part of the rural basic planning process to follow the low flow management strategy that the Edisto developed. They are one of the 7 highest users on the Edisto, and they agreed along with Charleston, Dominion, Orangeburg to curtail their withdrawals and switch to an alternative source, in this case groundwater, if flows drop below a certain threshold. Which hasn't happened since that strategy's been documented in the plan, but theoretically, I think they would do that. They've made additional attempts to expand their ability to use groundwater in the last several years. For what it's worth, they did agree to that. So this is all great discussion and kind of exactly what I expected. Because we only have a half hour left, I want to go back to a broader picture and see if we can at least agree on some concepts. Kind of like the broad RBC did. Let me go back to what the broad RBC did, because they had a very similar discussion and path to their discussion, which ultimately ended up in them making these kind of big picture recommendations, but without diving into the specifics. For better or for worse. Well, let's just talk about this one again, which has had general consensus in the PD and the Upper Savannah.
I don't like it because it has reasonable use.
Because reasonable use is not
Yeah,
defined.
what is that? Like, I don't like it.
Joe, how does DES determine reasonable use?
In the current surface water policy, it's not well defined.
Yeah, but how do you, I mean, you've had to determine reasonable use.
Right, well, I mean, in the capacity use program, it has sector specific criteria for reasonable use that seems to be working fine.
Right.
And there's agricultural users, all sector uses are using it, so. So it's specific criteria per sector.
Okay.
So, water supply might say, we're gonna consider the population served, anticipated growth, annual water use statistics, things of that nature.
Yeah.
That's just one example.
It's not defined in the act, though.
I think it's defined during litigation.
there is a definition of reasonable use, refers to the concept of using one's property or resources in a way that is fair and appropriate, not causing undue disruption to others' ability to use their own property, essentially balancing individual rights with the needs of the community. It often applies in the context like water rights, where landowners can use water from a shared source, so long as it doesn't significantly affect the availability for downstream users.
So it's the concept of reasonable use, also called beneficial use. So you can call it a million different names, but it's cooked into the nature of riparian rights, just like Thompson was just saying. And it's intentionally, in my opinion, it is intentionally ambiguous. And that means that it's usually defined during times of conflict, usually through litigation. So proactive definitions, I'm not surprised we're not finding exact language around it.
The context that the other RBCs approved this recommendation was trying to eliminate the registrations that have occurred in the EDSO and then the PD, where it's obviously not an intended use. And they've tied up a significantly large amount of water such that now new registrations have to be permits. So we could argue about reasonable use here. The other RBCs didn't try to dive into the details of that. They're just trying to say, hey, we don't think this is right. And we think however the law is rewritten, it should specify that DES, like they do for groundwater, has to apply some type of reasonable use criteria for all new surface water withdrawals. That was the intent of this recommendation. Now, the Upper Savannah added the word new because they wanted to make sure, to Jeff's point, that this isn't going to be gone back and applied to existing grandfathered users. They said, we're behind that, but we don't want it to apply to grandfathered users. So
maybe that needs to be pulled out as a separate recommendation, separate from the permit recommendation,
what
the reasonable use.
Well, so that's what.
Yeah.
That's what this one is here. Yeah. That's why I'm focusing on it, seeing if there's consensus behind it. And if you want to keep it as all, or Jeff's probably going to say that it should just be for new surface water withdrawals. What do you think about that? Do you agree that there needs to be a mechanism so that, because what may happen is what happened to the ESO and the PD throughout the state, and then everybody's going to have to get a permit.
If we make it new, I might throw out my recommendation that registrations become 20-year permits. I like the idea of everyone following the same rules. And I understand you're gonna oppose that on the fundamentals, but I'm also trying to be reasonable here and saying, hey, how do we get everyone to the same rules while preserving the grandfathering, but putting a limit on it, if that makes sense? You know, I'm trying to get to everyone's playing by the same rules, but put a duration on it that's long enough that your group could stomach it and other groups aren't going to like it because it's too long and everyone's going to be unhappy. But to me, sometimes that's where you read it.
So that if you can put a requirement in there that you have to reapply in 20 years, but you're guaranteed not to be reduced if you can show the need. That is what what most water utilities are fighting for now, is that we've got to reapply in I think 2053.
You want to,
and if we're not at 150, I don't want them to say, oh, we're only going to give you 90 now. We want.
But if you have a reasonable need to maintain it, you know, and get it renewed, you'd be okay with that.
Right. So, I mean, basically, you're grandfathering those people forever until they hit that limit.
But you're putting the brakes on the people who never built the pond.
Correct.
Yeah, to some extent. You're taking it out of their hands, which really helps protect it for the farmers who really need it.
But if they put a pump in and they get a permit, then that permit is renewable for as long as they're farming. And then when they sell it to an apartment complex, we get that permit.
Well, that's the other question about registrations. Who is registered?
Is it the land or the person?
Me or the land?
I was gonna ask that question.
And I'm not sure the answer to that.
Riparian should be associated with land.
It should be. I'm not sure that it is.
And if it's with a person, then my comment may be not needed, because I don't think anyone's gonna live forever.
Well, it's not associated with land because it's not, registrations aren't transferable. So it's associated with whoever applied for it, the owner.
See, that would be one of the reasons that I would be opposed to new registrants being having different.
Well,
because if I die and pass it to my kids, they don't have to be registered.
And that solves what I was trying to. And that solves what I was gonna get to, at some point, everyone plays by the same rules. Of course, that creates the problem for you of your kids want to make sure they can keep farming on that farm the same way they were taught to.
Joe, doesn't the law allow for
Transfers
transfers to family?
Just like a permit can be transferred, right? Yeah, right.
I was looking at that. It speaks to transferability of permits.
Which permits?
Yeah.
Really?
Is it
A lot of ambiguity.
Yeah, I think maybe those recommendations
okay?
make this less ambiguous.
Yeah, so back up again. I'm still trying to decide if there's support. I still want to understand if there's support for the gray highlighted area here, whether we have new or all. Is there, we can have one or the other, but is there support behind this type of recommendation?
And this is separate from the.
This is separate from the permits versus registrations issue. This is just trying to make it so that registrations now can't tie up water, which then requires future registrations, if there are future registrations, to get permits.
So do we have a good enough understanding of what currently exists for groundwater withdrawals, and is that appropriate for surface water?
That was going to be my question. I agree.
Because we're saying this thing. You can take out the word reasonable use and say the law should allow for criteria to be applied to all surface water withdrawals like the groundwater. But I don't know what those criteria are to say, I endorse that. I'm assuming that the groundwater ones have some logic behind them that maybe the surface water ones don't.
But we're not capacity use area like groundwater.
Well, that's kind of what this is getting at, in my opinion. It's, is there a capacity use requirement for all water in the state?
I also heard that removing reasonable root use didn't help anything. From what you just said.
Well, right.
Yeah, let's answer Casey's question. I think Joe, you can answer his question. For the capacity use area, there is definitions more or less around reasonable use. There's criteria.
Sector specific criteria.
Exactly. So sector specific. So they do.
Which you don't have for surface water.
Right.
Well, groundwater is just a totally different animal. I mean, it's sitting there. I mean,
Well, I understand
it's
that.
not going anywhere. That water in that river or stream, it's just flowing past. You don't use it, it's gone.
Yeah.
More's coming.
Yeah.
Okay, so knowing that there is sector specific criteria to help define what reasonable use is for groundwater, if that was applied for surface waters, would you be in favor of this broad recommendation?
Like instead of saying like what exists for groundwater, we say sector specific use criteria.
We can if you want to. It already exists for groundwater. In fact, if we don't know specifically what it is, to me, it's kind of inconsequential. It's there. The DES uses it when they determine reasonable use. Other states like Florida, the water management districts have specific criteria that they use for their permits. So
But it's sector specific. Are you talking about, whether you think that aquifer is adequately recharging?
No, I'm meaning the type of use. So there's irrigation, industrial, public water supply, golf course. Each one of those has specific criteria listed that we evaluate.
Right.
And those criteria range from,
They've already
water use
shown the
per
water.
acre, calculated irrigation requirements, anticipated growth, a variety of things.
We just can't say, we know the law's broke and somebody should fix it.
That's what this one is really saying. There's this problem with the way the law is written because unlike groundwater, surface water doesn't have reasonable use criteria and it needs to be fixed. That's all you're really saying here.
Very comfortable saying that.
You're comfortable saying that. Who else is comfortable saying that? Yeah,
That's broken.
yeah,
Right now, the law's winning.
yeah. Are you comfortable if it said new? Jeff? Yeah. What about?
Jeff and I already talked about this.
Yeah, Thompson, what about you? Are you comfortable with this? I mean, this,
I'm still a little uncomfortable.
yeah. What are you uncomfortable about? What parts of it, are there kind of negative consequences of this? Or-
Yeah, Yeah, I mean, I think that there's just a basic extreme danger if you just open the law back up. To try to fix something small, and that's, you open up everything.
So Thompson, I think it's gonna happen though, regardless, like
You think
It's-
so?
well-
I don't.
this, you don't think water SC is gonna have any success, you don't think that the executive order is gonna lead to any change. Like, I think it's probably
You
going
know, some
to,
of this is a legislature, not state.
If it,
Yeah,
I
he's
just-
absolutely right.
it's
What the
happening
governor
next
says is
year.
irrelevant.
I mean, I don't know, I got no crystal ball either.
I mean, yeah, I don't know, but I just feel like this is our opportunity to say something.
Legislature.
Otherwise, we say nothing, and it's like, what was the point, right?
so what we can do too here, if you're. If you want to stay with, supporting this, you'd rather not suggest anything that would open up the law, we can, do our vote. If there's a majority, we'll note that.
Well, I mean, what you're saying here in this highlighted area, you're not saying that they'll open it up and change the law. You just say reasonable use shot criteria should be applied. Farm Bureau's position has been is they could do that in a regulatory sense without opening the law.
Yeah. Yeah, I understand that, I just don't know how we write that into our plan. Because that's solely.
So, I mean, I'm just saying, on
Yes,
one hand, I'm not opposed to reasonable use criteria being applied. But, y'all's interpretation of this is we want to open up some surface water is wrong. Yeah, I don't.
So, Thompson, if you go with changing through regulatory, doesn't that have to go through the legislature?
Well,
Yes.
yes, if you just want to write new regulations and interpretation of regulations. I mean, these folks, these regulatory agencies routinely talk about legislative intent. Which I don't normally agree with, but I don't, we might could even settle the thing in the court somewhere, but.
But a lot of the laws give these agencies the ability to define regulations to meet certain purposes. So it's the case of, to some extent, I think they do have the ability to write their own regulations. As long as they meet a purpose, and then that itself in the court and legislation.
Gate regulations and put it on the desk of the legislature, and if they don't do anything about it, then a certain length of time, it becomes law, basically, yeah.
I realize what I'm saying, maybe more federal.
But there is a lot of specific language in the Surface Withdrawal Act, probably too much specific language that didn't allow for, I think in DHEC's eyes, didn't allow for interpretation. Thompson, you and I think there was probably room for interpretation that they didn't take advantage of.
Right.
Because it got political quick.
Right.
But as the law is written, it's pretty discreet, it kind of lays out, in my opinion, a lot more than it should.
Okay, yes, besides Thompson, does anybody else have issue with this recommendation? With or without the word new? In front of surface water withdrawals.
Yeah, the reasonable use, I still have an issue with that, unless we are defining some sort of benchmark for what we mean by that. We're adding ambiguity to something that's already.
Again, I think that's defined as well as it can be in the groundwater law, groundwater act. There's sector specific criteria around reasonable use, and that's probably the best it's going to get. So we have to just trust that that's going to be equally applied to surface water.
And I don't think we should allow unreasonable use. I realize there's definition bits, and sometimes that ends up in the litigation, and that's the reason we have government to do that.
How many of you are agreeing to this though without having read the Groundwater Act? Be honest, yeah.
From what he
So-
told me,
We cannot. I just, that's so irresponsible to agree to something we haven't even read.
Well, we've been told basically what it contains.
I would want to read it before supporting that.
This says that reasonable use of groundwater in South Carolina is governed by a number of regulations, including groundwater withdrawal permits, groundwater flow rate, groundwater withdrawal limits, and groundwater management plan, and describes each of those. This is just AI, so I don't know, I haven't actually. We can always put this in a yellow bucket and revisit it.
Okay, well, maybe for the next meeting, Joe, could DES provide us documentation about the specific criteria that's used for groundwater?
Sure.
Okay,
That'd be great.
okay.
What happened to your 1 minute conversation?
Yeah. I want to have friends.
He was like, I know this is gonna take a while.
Wow, okay, well, even though we haven't settled on something, I have heard kind of the voice here. I understand Thompson's stance, and I think we want to be able to document that. I'm thinking in terms of what we prepare for Water SC for their December meeting, so we can represent your voice. And we heard a couple different voices here, so I'm gonna make sure we capture those. Most are for this. Greenville Water wants to make sure that new is in there, like the Upper Savannah suggested. And Thompson has concerns about this for a couple reasons. One, because he feels like DES should already be able to use the regulation to determine reasonable use for surface water. And two, they're concerned about opening up the regulations and law altogether. So those are the reasons that you're. Oh, that.
Is that unintended?
Unintended consequences, yeah. But you do realize that a consequence of this though could be that more of the EDISO and PD occurrence happens.
John.
Yep.
Can I ask Tom like 2 quick questions?
Yes.
Because I feel like this could help maybe next steps for ag stuff. So Thompson, question for you. 2 things. One, would you be supportive of agricultural users having a contingency plan that includes their farmed ponds so that we better understand farm resiliency with respect to what you're storing on site?
Well, there again, I mean, that's kind of what we were hoping to avoid by not having to go through the permitting process, and having to do all that study and hire engineers and consultants and all that to document all this data that we as farmers don't have the expertise, as an expert to document all this stuff. So we're going back to the permitting process almost, and you start asking us to hire engineers and consultants.
I learned from my grandfather at an early age, beware the farmer that acts like they're the dumbest person on the road.
So.
I'm up with like. When you get to the size farms of Walford Farms, down there, yes, they have the resources. And I don't know, has any of y'all ever visited their farm and saw their pumping station down there? I mean, it is state of the art. You can float by and you don't even know what's happening when they're pumping water. But they've got the resources. I mean, they're operating in 5 states. I mean, they're family operations, but they're a huge operation. And they're very efficient, and they could, like 500-600 acres that they put in riparian buffers around the Edisto. I mean, it's a state of the art conservation farm down there too. I mean, everybody thinks of them as huge water users, and they are. But they did it in a very responsible way.
So I'll admit that one of the things that I think is challenging for me is not having everybody under the same permitting structure is that what we don't know is what redundancy farms really have in their system with those farm ponds, because they're not included in the SWAM model, obviously, and we don't have an appreciation for that. So like, I'm kind of trying to find, if we're not gonna come to some agreement on having everybody go to a permit, like what can we do so that we have better information for decision making? And maybe that's a contingency plan, or another alternative could be piloting a meter tracker, so we better understand withdrawal of ag users, so that we have a better appreciation for your point, Melanie, earlier about really, you're allowed to withdraw as much as you want regardless, right, based on how the law is written. So what if we come up with some sort of incentivized program that is funded? We come up with a pilot that we do in the Saluda to help better understand what we're pulling. I'm trying to come up with like, if we're not gonna get to any of these, what can we get to that you're open to?
Well, like I say, agriculture is always gonna push back when you start putting more paperwork on, some more reporting requirements and all that, we're always gonna push back. Quite frankly, you know, and this is not really part of this discussion, but we would love to build more ponds. But that's something they used to, the government cost sharing on, now it's frowned upon. I mean, they don't want to help you even lay out a pond. So that, you know, that in itself would be an extra incentive for farms to hold water, but it's not really there anymore like it used to be to build a new pond. So there's just a lot of issues there. But let me ask y'all this. What's magic about 3 million gallons? Is that an appropriate number?
10,000 gallons a day.
Yeah.
That's where the number comes from.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right there.
But anyway, we're, you know, I mean, that number was just pulled out of the air is an appropriate number where you should be registered, and should be able to use more without being permission, yes. And that's a discussion nobody seemed to have. They just accepted that 3 million gallons a month and let her go.
Okay, well, we're almost at time. I'm just trying to think of how I can what if, so I want to continue discussion on basically this page here, where we're talking about reasonable use. We're talking about the idea of enforceable to be effective. I think we're not going to have consensus behind registration permits. We had a number of other policy related recommendations, but because we're kind of running short on time in our overall process, and we want to get this wrapped up as the state water plan is writing. I think what I may do is circulate these last couple recommendations that we've talked about a little bit and ask you all to respond back to me and say whether you support them or you don't. I mean, we put a lot of time into crafting these. They're generally pretty well written. I think you might be able to offer up some very minor wordsmithing things that don't change the meaning of them, just so they read better. But Chair and Vice Chair, are you comfortable if everybody between now and our next meeting take some time to just read these last 2 pages, beginning with this one? So there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 kind of policy related ones, and telling me before the meeting whether you support them or not.
I'm comfortable with it, or
I guess
y'all
that's-
willing to do it?
Yeah.
I would just ask that we recirculate it with just the exact ones.
Yeah,
But then, and then maybe like under each one, like have like box, yes or no, and then you click a box so that where it's like idiot proof, let's just like make it easy for ourselves.
He is not calling you all.
I can make it easy, just circulate. I can circulate a Google poll of all of these, so all you have to do is click yes or no.
That would be great.
All right, so I may do that, but that'll be the approach for these final ones, which again, we've spent time talking about them. We've got proposed language. I want to use a little bit of time next time to continue this discussion and see what we can agree upon for changes to law, regulation, or policy as it relates to the Surface Water Act. And then we really need to get into our implementation plan.
But if you do say this, if you're gonna put something forward on there, what you had highlighted a while ago was about as close to anything that I would agree to. So, you know, if you wanted to adopt that with a slight objection, you know, and send it along, I'm not gonna fight you.
Okay.
I'm not going to continue to argue against it.
Okay, yeah. Okay, we have started the implementation plan based on the recommendations that we'd already approved and our list of water management strategies, we've approved a number of other recommendations this time, so we're pretty much through with what's going to be in our implementation plan. The recommendations around the policy, legislative, and regulatory issues generally don't make it into our implementation plan. They're just saying we support this, or, you know, we think the law should be changed this way, but there's nothing that you're really going to go out and do unless you want to say that you're going to lobby for this particular position, then it would be in your plan. So that said, we've got most of what we need to write the implementation plan, and we've started that. I didn't circulate it yet, but I think what we'll do in the next 2 or 3 weeks is add in the final recommendations we approved today, add in some proposed actions, and then circulate it and get you starting to look at those proposed actions as a starting point and decide, do you want to commit to that? Do you want to commit DES to that? Do you want to commit others that are involved in implementing those actions to that? That may make the discussion a little shorter. So that'll all be for the December, what day is it? 18th? 16th, yeah, 18th meeting, yeah. Is that okay? All right. In the meantime, you're going to get chapter 7 before that next meeting. We're close to finishing addressing comments on 2, 3, and 4. We just got another set of comments on 2, 3, and 4 from Rob, so we need to incorporate those into the log. You have until 25th to send me chapter 5 and 6 comments. Before the next meeting, we'll probably try to then circulate the comment log and the revised chapter, so you can begin to look at those. I know, Melanie, you were asking about that last time.
I would love to see a comment log, and I would love to see revised chapters of the earlier chapters. I kept going back to them, because I just don't want to review that, because I know that they've made significant improvements.
Sure.
So would it be possible to get that?
Yeah,
Get revised
Yeah,
chapters?
I was hesitant to send it out because there's still a handful of them we have to address, but I don't want to delay it a whole lot longer.
Whatever you know that you're going to change, so that I have a cleaner copy to work from.
Sure.
I'll stop there.
Okay, that's all I wanted to cover. Casey, anything else?
Thank y'all. Quite frankly, our discussion today just reiterates why I think we've got to date the best RBC, and in the future, we'll continue to be the best. We're willing to speak for our areas that we represent. We listen when others speak, and I think that's what makes this a good, robust process. Thank you all for being here. Folks online, thank you for being with us, and I would accept a motion to be adjourned.
So moved.
Second?
Aye.
All those in favor, right hand? Safe travels. We'll see you next month.
Thank you, everyone. If you know you can't make it next month, by the way, let Tom or I know ahead of time.
Y'all been pretty good about it.
Yeah, everybody said that they should do December, so.
Right.
Yep.